The Battle of the Hollow Woods. Leo had always loved the woods behind his house. It had been his childhood refuge, his quiet place of exploration. From the moment his small feet had first ventured into the thick of the trees, he had felt a magnetic pull to the ancient forest that sprawled out beyond his backyard. In the daytime, the woods were full of life, a vibrant tapestry woven with the sounds of nature. The chirping of birds that darted between branches like sparks of joy, the rustling of leaves in the wind, the gentle murmur of a creek winding its way through the forest floor, and the way the sunlight filtered through the canopy, dappling the earth with golden hues. Every season brought something new: bright wildflowers in spring, the lush green of summer, the crisp colors of autumn, and the quiet solitude of winter when snow covered everything in a thick, peaceful blanket. He had explored every corner, every twist of path, every moss-covered rock. The woods had been his world, and in that world, Leo always felt safe. But tonight was different. Something was wrong. He stood at the edge of the woods, his heart a little heavier than usual. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness. There was no breeze to carry the familiar smells of pine and damp earth. The birds were silent, as though the entire forest had come to a halt, holding its breath. He squinted into the trees, trying to make out familiar shapes through the growing fog that had settled over the woods like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The mist was thick, far thicker than he'd ever seen before, and it seemed to creep closer with every passing minute, curling around the trunks of trees and swallowing up the path in front of him. It was as if the forest itself had been erased, reduced to an eerie, silent void. Leo took a step forward, his boots sinking slightly into the soft earth beneath him, the moist ground heavy with the weight of the fog. He felt a slight chill creep up his spine, though the air wasn't particularly cold. It was something else, a deep, bone-chilling feeling of unfamiliarity. The woods, which had always felt like home, now seemed alien and unwelcoming. It was as though something had shifted in the very essence of the forest, as though the woods themselves were no longer the safe place he once knew. He stopped for a moment, trying to steady his breath. The metallic scent that filled the air was faint at first, but soon it was unmistakable. It wasn't the clean, fresh scent of rain or the rich, earthy smell that always followed a storm. It was something darker, something older, that made his stomach churn. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like the remnants of rusted metal left out in the rain. And yet, it lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating, like a whisper of a forgotten memory. Something ancient, something buried long ago. Leo's eyes darted around, searching for a sign of what could cause such a smell. But the fog was so thick, so dense, that everything around him seemed blurred and unreachable. The trees appeared like dark shadows, their once familiar shapes distorted and twisted by the haze. As he moved deeper into the forest, the fog seemed to intensify, wrapping around him in a dense, impenetrable cloud. The air grew heavier with each step, thick with moisture and unspoken tension. The once cheerful sounds of the woods, birds chirping, leaves rustling in the wind, the distant call of animals, had all vanished, replaced by an unnatural silence. It was the kind of silence that felt like it was waiting for something that hadn't yet come but was inevitably approaching. Leo's chest tightened as he walked forward, his breath becoming shallow, the sharp scent of the fog clogging his senses. There was no sound, no movement, nothing but the thick, damp air that clung to his skin. His footsteps were muffled by the wet earth beneath him, and even the crunch of his boots against the fallen leaves seemed to vanish into the fog. With each step, the forest grew darker, the shadows stretching longer, as though the trees themselves were closing in on him. The trees, which had once seemed like friends, their twisted branches reaching out to greet him, now seemed like dark, towering figures, their shapes growing more distorted and foreboding in the mist. The path ahead was barely visible, the fog swallowing it whole, leaving him unsure of where he was going. The further he ventured into the woods, the more he felt the pressure of something unseen, something watching him from the depths of the fog. His breath caught in his throat. He couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The woods, which had always felt so welcoming and safe, now felt like a place of secrets. A place where something lurked just beyond his reach, waiting in the shadows. His eyes darted to the trees, trying to make sense of the shapes they formed, but the mist obscured everything. He reached for the pocket of his jacket, pulling out his phone, but the screen was dark. No signal. Not that he expected any. The woods had always been a place untouched by technology, a place where the modern world faded away, but tonight, the absence of connection seemed to underscore the unsettling isolation. Leo's heart began to race. The silence felt oppressive, almost suffocating. He quickened his pace, not sure if it was the fog or something else pushing him forward, but he could not shake the feeling that something was drawing him deeper into the forest. It wasn't a feeling of curiosity, not the eager, childlike curiosity that had once propelled him to explore every inch of the woods. No, this was different. It was a compulsion, an urge that seemed to come from somewhere deep within him, somewhere primal. And it was as if the forest itself was beckoning him to follow, to go deeper into the thickening mist where the path was no longer clear. He stumbled over a hidden route, catching himself just before falling, and paused for a moment, his hand gripping the rough bark of a nearby tree for balance. As he steadied himself, he glanced around, trying to make sense of his surroundings. The fog had grown so thick that he could barely see past the next tree, and the trees themselves, their bark twisted and worn with age, looked almost wrong. There was something unnatural about them. Their shapes, their size, the way they seemed to lean toward him, as though they were alive, watching him. His breath came in short bursts, his chest tightening with each inhale, and his mind raced with thoughts he couldn't calm. He had been here countless times before, but never like this. Never with this gnawing sense of dread. As he walked deeper, he noticed the ground beneath his feet had changed. The dirt, once soft and familiar, now felt cold hard, almost unnaturally so. It wasn't the usual springy feel of the earth after rain. It felt like stone, like something ancient was buried beneath the surface, pressing up through the soil, waiting to be uncovered. Leo swallowed hard. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, to run, but something, some unseen force, was pushing him forward. He wasn't sure if it was his own curiosity, or something else, something older, something buried deep in the heart of these woods. But he could not shake the feeling that he had wandered into a place where the very fabric of reality had begun to shift. And with every step he took, he felt himself slipping further into a world that didn't belong to him. His heart beat faster, his skin tingling with the hairs standing on end, as the fog seemed to draw closer, wrapping around him like the fingers of a long-forgotten hand. The metallic scent in the air grew stronger, filling his nostrils, choking him with its sharp, sickly sweetness. The mist swirled and shifted around him like a living thing, and for a brief moment he thought he saw something dark and shadowy, move just beyond the edge of his vision. His pulse spiked. He wasn't alone. But who or what was watching him? Leo's steps faltered. He couldn't see anything clearly through the fog, but his senses were heightened. The air felt charged, as if something powerful was on the verge of revealing itself. And Leo, despite the rising panic in his chest, could not shake the overwhelming need to continue, to push forward into the heart of the mystery that seemed to surround him, thick and suffocating. Something was waiting for him here in the woods. Something ancient. Something he had been drawn to without even knowing it. And now, there was no turning back. Why do I have this feeling? Like someone's watching me. Leo mumbled to himself, his heart racing faster than usual. The words escaped his lips in a hushed whisper, almost as if he were afraid to say them aloud, as though speaking the fear might make it real. He stopped walking, standing in the dense fog that surrounded him, his breath shallow and erratic, his eyes darting to the trees around him. For a moment, everything was still. Too still. His ears strained, listening for any sound, a bird, a rustle in the leaves, a distant crack of a branch breaking, but there was nothing. Only the oppressive silence that hung thick in the air. The sensation crept over him like a cold hand brushing the back of his neck, sending a shiver down his spine. He had been in these woods countless times before, but this was different. Every muscle in his body seemed to tense, as though his instincts were screaming at him to turn and run, to escape whatever was lurking just beyond his reach. But where could he go? The fog had swallowed the path behind him, and the mist ahead of him was as dense as a wall, making it impossible to see even a few feet in front of him. Leo's eyes flicked toward the trees, their twisted, gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The mist clung to the trunks, curling around them in a ghostly embrace. His breath caught in his throat as he thought he saw a shadow move between the trees. A flicker, almost imperceptible, like a figure just out of the corner of his eye. He blinked, trying to focus, but the fog seemed to play tricks on him. "Get a grip, Leo," he muttered to himself, shaking his head as if trying to clear the fog from his thoughts. He took another step, but the sensation of being watched only grew stronger, more intense, until it felt like a weight pressing on his chest. It was as if eyes, hidden somewhere in the mist, in the darkness, were fixated on him, studying his every move. His instincts were telling him to run, but his feet felt as though they were rooted to the ground, his body frozen in place by an unseen force. He could almost feel the presence around him, moving, watching, just out of reach, like a phantom brushing against his skin. He shook his head again, this time more violently, as if trying to rid himself of the creeping paranoia that was settling into his bones. "It's just the fog. Just your mind playing tricks," he told himself, but his voice sounded hollow, even to his own ears. Every hair on the back of his neck stood on end, and his breath became even more shallow, almost imperceptibly. He could feel the pulse in his temples, the rapid thrum of his heartbeat, his nerves on edge. The fog was thick now, almost suffocating, closing in on him like a tightening noose. The air smelled heavy, almost sickly, like something forgotten, something buried deep in the past. The metallic tang of rust was sharper now, mingling with the earthy scent of damp moss, and it made his stomach turn. Leo glanced over his shoulder again, a futile attempt to reassure himself that he was alone. The forest was still. The fog was still. But his senses were heightened, more acutely aware of every rustle, every creak of the trees, every shift in the air. There was something about the quiet, something unnatural about it. It wasn't the usual tranquility he'd grown so accustomed to in these woods. No, this silence was different, deeper, more ominous. It felt suffocating, like the world had been paused and was waiting, holding its breath, for something to happen. He forced himself to take a step forward, but the sensation of being followed, of being watched, never left him. It was persistent, like a shadow that lingered just behind him, closing the distance, inch by inch, no matter how fast he moved. The feeling settled deep into his chest, making it harder to breathe. He tried to focus on the familiar sounds of the forest. His footsteps, the occasional rustle of a branch, the soft whistle of the wind, but all of those sounds seemed muted now, as if they were coming from far away. Leo swallowed, trying to steady his breath. The coldness in the air seemed to be seeping into his bones, making him shiver despite the warmth of his jacket. He could hear nothing now, nothing but his own rapid breathing and the relentless beating of his heart. But in the silence, the feeling of being watched only grew stronger, more insistent. It wasn't just his imagination. He was sure of it now. There was something, or someone, out there, moving just beyond the mist, waiting for him. "Who's there?" Leo called out, his voice shaking, barely more than a whisper against the thick fog. But the words seemed to vanish into the nothingness, swallowed up by the dense air around him. No response. The forest remained eerily still, and yet the pressure, the weight of that unseen presence, pressed closer, as if whatever it was, it had heard him. And it was waiting. The metallic scent grew even stronger, and with it, a new sense of unease settled over Leo. He had no idea what was happening, but every fiber of his being screamed that he should leave, should run back to the safety of his home. But for some reason, his feet wouldn't obey. It was as if the forest had claimed him, wrapped him in its strange, heavy embrace, and now, there was no turning back. He turned, half expecting to see something lurking behind him, but there was nothing. Nothing but the fog, the trees, and the oppressive silence that hung in the air like a thick curtain. And yet, the feeling of being watched remained, gnawing at him, clawing at the edges of his sanity. His heart raced even faster now, his breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. He didn't know what to do, or where to go. Every step he took seemed to carry him deeper into the heart of the forest, into the mystery, into whatever force was drawing him in. The presence was getting closer, he could feel it, just at the edge of his awareness. It was closing in, wrapping itself around him. And Leo realized, with a sinking feeling, that it wasn't just his mind playing tricks on him. Something, someone, was watching him. And whatever it wasn't going away. He wasn't the bravest kid, but when his younger sister had vanished from their backyard without a trace earlier that evening, Leo knew there was only one place she could be. Hollow Woods, the dark, mysterious forest that everyone in town avoided. It wasn't just any ordinary forest. It had a reputation, a history of whispers and legends that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Every local, from the oldest grandparent to the youngest child, had heard the stories. They spoke of strange lights flickering deep inside its thick canopy, of eerie howls echoing on windless nights, and of figures that moved between the trees without ever touching the ground. Some people said it was haunted by the souls of those who'd disappeared over the years. Others claimed it was cursed, a place where time seemed to bend and twist, where the very air hung heavy with secrets no one dared to uncover. For as long as he could remember, Leo had been told to stay away from the woods. His parents had made it very clear that Hollow Woods was not a place for children, that it was full of dangers both seen and unseen. They warned him about the stories, the legends. They'd say things like, "It's best not to tempt fate, Leo, and there are places in this world that aren't meant to be explored." He used to scoff at the warnings, thinking they were just exaggerations to keep him inside, away from the wild allure of the forest. But tonight, the stories didn't seem so far-fetched. It was just after dusk when Leo had noticed his sister missing. It was strange at first, because the two of them were supposed to be hanging out in the backyard. Nothing special, just enjoying the evening before bed. But when he turned around and found the yard empty with only her red ball left lying on the grass, a sinking feeling formed in his stomach. He'd called her name, thinking she'd just wandered off to the swings or behind the shed. But there was no answer. The minutes passed, and the silence grew thicker, almost suffocating. She wouldn't have gone far, he told himself. She couldn't have. But she was gone, completely gone, as though the earth had opened up and swallowed her whole. Leo's thoughts had raced, but there was only one conclusion he could draw. Hollow Woods. That's where she had to be. It was a strange certainty, a gut feeling that gnawed at him relentlessly. The stories always spoke of the woods as a place that drew people in, especially children. Something about its dark corners, its twisted trees, and its endless shadows seemed to whisper to the curious, pulling them deeper until they could no longer find their way back. The more he thought about it, the more everything made sense. She was out there, alone, and she didn't know what she was walking into. He had to find her. Leo didn't even think to grab his phone or tell anyone where he was going. His legs moved on their own, carrying him toward the forest before his mind could catch up with his actions. The light from the setting sun had barely slipped away when he crossed the boundary of the woods, and the temperature seemed to drop immediately. The air was damp, the kind of cold that sank into your bones, and the smell of wet earth filled his nostrils. As he stepped forward, the first crunch of his boots on the dry leaves echoed louder than it should have, almost as if the silence of the forest was mocking him. Every sound felt amplified, the rush of blood in his ears, the beating of his heart, the movement of the leaves in the faint breeze. It all became overwhelming. The trees here were different, ancient almost, with thick trunks that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. Their gnarled limbs reached out like twisted fingers, and their roots crept across the forest floor like serpents, snaking through the underbrush. He'd always thought the forest was beautiful from a distance, but up close, it felt claustrophobic. The further he ventured in, the more suffocating the fog became. It crept around his ankles like a living thing, curling up and over his boots, dragging its dampness along with it. He shivered, but not from the cold. Every step he took felt heavier, as if the very ground itself was resisting him, as if the woods were alive, pushing back against his intrusion. The deeper he went, the darker it became. The trees had started to close in on him, their branches intertwining above, blocking out most of the fading daylight. A low mist began to rise from the forest floor, and the air seemed to thicken, growing harder to breathe. Leo swallowed hard, trying to push down the anxiety gnawing at his throat, but the eerie sensation of being watched never left him. It followed him with each step, growing stronger, until he was certain that eyes, hidden in the shadows, were observing his every move. The path he was on had once been clear, well-trodden, but now it was barely visible under the thick blanket of mist. The more he walked, the less he could hear. The distant sounds of the town, the chirping of birds, even the wind seemed to die out, leaving only the strange, unnatural stillness. His flashlight flickered, casting long, jagged shadows across the uneven terrain, and Leo's heartbeat quickened. Every sound that broke the silence felt unnatural. Every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig, every creak of the branches above. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. His mind raced. What had he gotten himself into? The stories of the cursed woods, the rumors of the strange creatures that lurked in the dark, began to bubble to the surface of his thoughts. He'd dismissed them before, chalked them up to childish fantasy. But now, with each passing second, the stories felt more real, more urgent. Leo tried to steady his breathing, but it was hard to focus. His thoughts kept jumping from one worst-case scenario to the next. What if something had already gotten to her? What if she was out here, lost, unable to find her way back? What if the rumors about the creatures were true? No, he couldn't think that way. He had to find her. Leo's footsteps faltered as a strange sound echoed through the trees. A low, distant howl, almost like an animal, but not quite. His heart skipped a beat, and he froze, straining his ears, listening. The howl was faint, but unmistakable, like the sound of something or someone calling out from deep within the forest. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, to run, to get out of the woods before whatever it was had a chance to find him. But he couldn't. Not with his sister out here. Not with the desperation mounting in his chest, threatening to drown him. He pressed on, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. The howl had faded, but the feeling of being watched only grew stronger, the pressure on his chest unbearable. It felt as if something not human, was moving just beyond the trees, tracking his every move. The deeper Leo went, the less he felt in control. The forest was taking on a life of its own. The trees seemed to twist and shift, the shadows growing longer, reaching out for him. He had to hurry, but something was pulling him further into the heart of Hollow Woods. Something ancient, was calling to him, just as it had called to his sister. He had to find her. He had to. Time seemed to blur as Leo walked deeper into the woods, his flashlight flickering more frequently, casting long, haunted shadows across the path. The sounds of the forest, the distant cries of creatures, the whispering wind, all blurred together, like the forest itself was wrapping around him, suffocating him in its grip. Every part of him screamed to turn back, but he couldn't. Not until he found her. He grabbed the flashlight, his hands slick with sweat as he fumbled to click it on, the beam flickering unsteadily before finally steadying. Slipping on his jacket with one arm, he shoved his other hand into his pocket to retrieve his phone, but the screen was blank, no signal. Nothing. Of course, there wouldn't be. There never was when he needed it the most. He was on his own now. He had to be. Leo didn't waste a moment more thinking about it. Without another thought, he bolted out of the door and into the woods. His feet hit the soft, damp earth of the yard, sending a shiver through him that had nothing to do with the cold. Every inch of his body screamed for him to stop, to turn around and forget this madness. But Leo couldn't stop now. He couldn't leave his sister out there. Not in Hollow Woods. The dense trees on the outskirts of the woods seemed like they had grown closer, forming an almost impenetrable wall, daring him to step into the unknown. Leo didn't hesitate. He pushed forward into the shadows, the woods swallowing the light behind him. As he entered the forest, the familiar sights of the trees that had been his sanctuary during childhood felt alien now. They seemed like silent sentinels watching him with eyes he couldn't see. His flashlight illuminated only a few feet in front of him, but it felt as though the darkness reached endlessly beyond that, like an abyss waiting to pull him in. The further he went, the quieter it became. The birds, usually so chatty this time of evening, had fallen eerily silent. No rustling leaves, no soft hoots of owls or the faint chittering of nocturnal creatures. Even the crickets seemed to hold their breath. The wind, which had been swirling playfully through the trees when he first stepped into the yard, had died down to nothing. It was as if the forest itself was waiting for something. Waiting for him to make a move. His breath quickened in the still air, and he tried to convince himself that it was just his nerves. It's just the dark, he told himself, though the words felt hollow. There was a strange weight to the air, a heaviness that seemed to press on his chest with every step he took. Leo could feel the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end, and the familiar path through the trees that he'd walked countless times before felt impossibly long now. The flashlight beam cut through the thick fog that had begun to rise, casting shifting shadows on the trunks of trees that twisted unnaturally. The fog was thick, like a wet blanket smothering the earth. It clung to his shoes, making his steps sluggish, his body dragging through the fog as if the earth itself wanted to keep him from moving forward. It smelled of damp earth and something else. Something metallic. The kind of scent you get when you're standing too close to something ancient, something forgotten. His footsteps echoed unnaturally in the silence, each one punctuating the oppressive stillness. Leo could feel something else now. Something that wasn't just the forest around him, something that didn't belong. The feeling crept up his spine, like cold fingers, sending a shudder across his entire body. You're just being paranoid, he tried to tell himself, but the more he tried to ignore it, the more the sensation of being watched intensified. Something was there, lurking in the mist just beyond the reach of his flashlight. It was waiting for him. The further he ventured, the less he could shake the feeling that the woods had become hostile. The trees twisted more grotesquely now, as though they had always been here, watching, biding their time. The branches seemed to stretch toward him like skeletal hands, their gnarled forms blocking out the little light that made it through the fog. The trail beneath his feet had become less of a path and more of an obstacle course. The underbrush tangled with his legs, roots caught at his ankles, but he couldn't stop. Not now. His sister was out here somewhere, and Leo couldn't allow himself to falter. He needed to find her. He had to. But still, the deeper he went, the more the woods seemed to push back, as if they were fighting him, testing him. The chill of the air turned sharp, biting into him through his jacket. Each breath burned in his lungs, and Leo realized, with a growing sense of dread, that he was no longer sure if he was following a path or walking deeper into a labyrinth. The once familiar terrain was transforming around him. The woods were disorienting now, every direction looking the same. Even the trees, which had always felt like old friends to him, now felt like strangers, watching him with eyes that were hidden, just out of reach. It was then that Leo first heard it. A sound, low and barely perceptible at first, as if it were coming from beneath the earth itself, traveling through the fog. A whisper. He stopped dead in his tracks, his breath caught in his throat. He hadn't imagined it. It was real. Someone, or something, was out here with him. His heart hammered in his chest, each beat deafening in the stillness. He held his breath, waiting for another sound, but the woods remained utterly silent. The trees did not sway, the leaves did not rustle, even the fog seemed to freeze in place. For a moment, Leo felt like he was standing in some sort of suspended animation, trapped between a moment of danger and the relief of his own breath. Then, the whisper came again, louder this time. Leo. It wasn't a voice he recognized. It wasn't his sister. The sound was too soft, too distant, almost like it was coming from all around him, echoing through the trees, filtering through the dense fog. Leo's breath hitched. The voice was familiar in a way he couldn't quite place, the sound of his own name twisting through the trees like a thread of smoke. Leo. It came from just ahead, through the thickening fog. But the voice wasn't coming from a person. It was too other. Leo's fingers gripped the flashlight harder, his knuckles turning white as he took a step forward. The beam of light cut through the mist, but it illuminated nothing but shadows. Every step felt heavier now. The feeling of being watched had become undeniable, more intense, wrapping around him like the fog itself, suffocating him with its presence. He couldn't stop himself from moving forward. He had to find her. His sister. The trees shifted, and with them, the shadows seemed to follow, like dark figures just on the edge of his vision. He turned his head quickly, but there was nothing there. Only the eerie silence that had descended over the woods. And then, the whisper came again, this time much closer. Leo, don't come any closer. Leo's heart skipped a beat. His breath caught in his throat as the voice seemed to pierce the thick fog. It was sharp, urgent. He wasn't sure if it was warning him or if it was trying to keep him from the very thing he had come here to find. The words didn't make sense, but they felt important. He paused, his flashlight shaking in his grip as a cold shiver ran down his spine. Don't come any closer. The trees seemed to lean in, their shadows growing longer as the fog began to swirl around him. The ground beneath his feet felt spongy, alive almost, as if the earth itself was watching him, waiting for him to make his next move. A low rumble sounded through the woods, something that was neither animal nor wind. It came from deep within the forest, like a distant growl, a warning. And then it happened, the faintest flicker of movement in the distance. A shadow. No, it wasn't just a shadow. It was something else, something he couldn't place, something ancient and forgotten, stirring in the depths of the forest. His flashlight trembled in his hands, and for a moment, it felt as if the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting to see if Leo would take that next step. He took a deep breath. It wasn't too late yet. He was getting closer. He had to be. The faintest flicker of movement caught his eye again, and this time, he didn't hesitate. He moved forward, stepping deeper into the fog, drawn by the mysterious whisper of his name, hoping that whatever it was out here in the woods, it wasn't too late to find his sister. But deep down, a cold feeling settled into his gut. He might be looking for something far worse than he could ever imagine. The sound was soft at first, almost like the wind brushing through the leaves, a faint, elusive hum that teased the edges of his hearing. At first, Leo thought it was just the wind playing tricks on him, the fog bending the air and distorting his senses. He could almost convince himself that it wasn't real. His mind working overtime, panicked, grasping for any explanation to deny the cold dread creeping over him. But then, it came again. A low whisper, curling around the darkness like smoke, delicate yet piercing. Leo. The sound wasn't the wind. It was too deliberate, too purposeful. Leo's heart skipped in his chest. He froze in place, his breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps, his pulse thumping violently in his ears. His flashlight flickered again, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally far, stretching toward him with the same hunger in the voice that had spoken his name. He took a hesitant step forward, his breath hitching, and then there it was again, Leo. This time, it was clearer, stronger. The whisper was no longer just a distant murmur in the background, blending with the sounds of the forest. It was right there, close. So close it felt like it was coming from within his own mind. A voice, cold and smooth like the fog itself, crawling along his skin. His breath caught in his throat. It couldn't be. It was impossible. There was no one here. He was alone. Wasn't he? He spun around, eyes scanning the darkness with frantic desperation, the beam of his flashlight slicing through the fog in frantic arcs, but there was nothing. No one. Just the thick veil of mist surrounding him, closing in with every second, drowning out all other sounds. He squinted into the murky depths of the trees, the flickering light showing only gnarled trunks and twisting branches, silent and still. Then it came again, like a soft breath against his ear. Leo. Leo. He whipped his head around, his heart hammering wildly in his chest. The voice sounded even closer now, so close that it felt like it was behind him, in the very air he breathed. It was like the forest itself had learned his name and was calling it back to him with a hunger that made his blood run cold. A chill crept up his spine, creeping under his skin, like the shadows of the woods had seeped into his bones. His legs felt heavy, as though the ground was pulling at him, keeping him rooted in place. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the twisting branches, the soft rustling of the fog moving through the trees, as if waiting for something, or someone to emerge. Then, the voice came again, more distinct than before. Leo. He swallowed hard, his throat dry as dust, his hands shaking so violently that he could barely hold onto the flashlight. His thoughts were racing. Was it his sister? Was it a trick? No, he thought, his mind refusing to accept the possibility. It can't be her. She's out there somewhere, lost. His eyes darted around the woods, his feet inching forward despite the growing sense of dread. Was he losing his mind? His hand, trembling, reached for his phone again, but still, there was no signal. Nothing. He was alone in this suffocating fog with nothing but the whispers and the darkness, pulling him deeper into the woods. And yet, there was something about that voice, so familiar, yet not. The whisper came again, and this time, it wasn't just a name. Leo, why did you come here? It wasn't the same voice anymore. There was something different about it, an edge of sadness, of knowing, that chilled him deeper than the fog ever could. The voice was soft, gentle, as though it were trying to console him or warn him. But the words were unsettling, too. They felt like an invitation to something he couldn't name. Something he didn't want to find. He shivered, pulling his jacket tighter around himself, but it did little to shield him from the growing weight of the woods around him. Why had he come here? That thought gnawed at him like a phantom, tugging at his resolve. What was he really doing out here? To find his sister, Leo reminded himself. He had to find her. But the longer he stood there, the more the whispering voice tugged at him, like it knew something he didn't. The forest seemed to stretch on endlessly in all directions now, each shadow deeper than the last, and the air grew thicker, more oppressive with every breath. It was as if the woods themselves were alive, shifting, changing, and pulling him into their depths. The fog swirled more violently now, clouding his vision, and Leo's heart began to race even faster. He was losing control of his own thoughts, caught in the spiral of whispers that seemed to echo everywhere. The voice was growing louder, relentless, wrapping around him like an unseen hand. "Leo, you shouldn't have come." The voice was almost a whisper now, soft but firm, like the echo of his own guilt, as if it were calling him out for daring to step into a place where he didn't belong. His breath came quicker, every inhalation sharper, more desperate. What was that voice? Who was it? He didn't know anymore. He didn't care. All he knew was that something in the fog, in the woods, in that voice, was pulling him deeper, farther than he ever meant to go. And then, as if the fog itself had formed a solid wall around him, the whisper stopped. A deafening silence followed, so thick it felt suffocating. It wasn't just the quiet of the forest. It was a complete, unnatural stillness that made the hairs on his neck stand even straighter. He was surrounded, trapped in the very air itself. The silence stretched on, and Leo felt his heartbeat in his throat, a drumbeat that drowned out the world. He stared into the fog, searching for a sign, for anything to explain the deep, aching fear clawing at his chest. And then, from the blackness, the voice came again, closer than ever, sharp and clear. "Leo." He froze. His body tensed like a coiled spring, every muscle locking in place, as if trying to resist the pull of the darkness that seemed to be drawing him in. His flashlight flickered once more, its beam trembling in his hand, casting long, distorted shadows that twisted and danced around him, creating shapes that didn't belong in the natural world. For a moment, he could have sworn the shadows moved of their own accord, lurking behind trees, curling along the forest floor like serpents waiting to strike. The air grew heavier, thick with an unnatural chill that seeped into his bones, making him feel as if the very atmosphere had turned against him. The soft rustling of leaves that had once surrounded him in the woods now felt foreign, sinister, like the whisper of something watching, something waiting. His breath came in shallow, rapid bursts, and his heart pounded so loudly in his chest that it threatened to drown out every other sound. He could feel it now, a deep, palpable presence, something ancient, something that had been there long before him, long before anyone dared to step into Hollow Woods. And then, the voice came again, cutting through the silence like a blade. It wasn't like before. It wasn't a whisper in the wind, soft and coaxing. This was different. This was cold, hollow, as if the voice came from somewhere far beneath the earth, somewhere far removed from anything human. There was a weight to it, a heaviness, as if it were soaked in centuries of darkness and decay. Leo. The name rolled off the air like a distant, mournful cry, but there was no warmth in it. It was as if the voice had no regard for him, no care for who he was, only the presence of someone foolish enough to wander too far into its domain. He shuddered involuntarily, the cold seeping deeper into his skin, and for a moment, he thought he might lose himself in that voice, in the thickening fog that seemed to wrap itself around him, clinging to him like a wet blanket. The chill gnawed at him, spreading across his arms and legs, turning the warmth in his chest into a distant memory. The flashlight flickered again, its beam casting an unsettling glow on the trees. The shadows seemed to grow longer, stretching across the ground toward him, reaching out like fingers, reaching for something only they knew was there. Leo's fingers tightened around the flashlight, but it did little to steady his shaking hands. He could feel his grip slipping, the flashlight threatening to fall from his hand and vanish into the void. "Leo," the voice repeated, its tone more insistent now, more commanding, as if it knew that fear was starting to overtake him. The very air seemed to vibrate with its presence, and Leo could feel his pulse quicken, thudding louder and faster with each passing second. It was no longer just a voice. It was a force, a presence, a shadow that hovered just beyond the edges of his sight, never quite fully there, but always just out of reach. Leo wanted to turn and run, to sprint back to the safety of the house, to escape the suffocating grip of the woods and that terrible voice, but his feet were frozen to the ground. His body wouldn't move. It was as though something invisible was holding him in place, rooting him to the spot, as if the very woods had claimed him, marking him as their own. The flashlight flickered once more, casting an eerie light across the fog-shrouded trees. The shadows didn't retreat this time. They grew, expanding like ink spilling across water, swallowing the light, smothering it. The woods around him began to close in, the trees leaning in closer, their gnarled limbs reaching for him, as though the entire forest was alive, a sentient being, watching, waiting. His breath quickened as panic set in. What was it? What was this thing that had called him out here? The voice. It wasn't like anything he had ever heard before. It wasn't human. It wasn't even something he could comprehend. It was ancient. Something old. Something that didn't belong in this world, lurking beneath the surface of the forest, deep in the roots of the trees, seeping into the very air he was breathing. He could hear the voice again, but this time, it wasn't just his name. It was more. Something else, something harder to understand. A warning? A threat? Leo, the voice whispered again, but now it was more of a growl, a low rumbling sound, like something waking up from a long slumber. It didn't just say his name this time, it seemed to echo, as if there were more voices, all murmuring his name in unison, but each one twisted, distorted, growing louder, more insistent, as though the forest itself had started speaking in unison. Leo, the voice turned into a hiss, cold and sharp, like the sound of wind whipping through the branches, but with an edge of something dark, something far older than the trees that stood around him. He spun around again, his eyes wild, his breath ragged as he searched the fog for any sign of movement, anything that would explain what was happening. But there was nothing, only the endless stretch of trees and mist, the cold weight of the fog pressing in on him. No shadows moved. No figures emerged from the depths of the darkness. But he could feel it. He could feel them, the eyes watching. It was like the very trees themselves were watching him, and those invisible eyes were waiting for him to make his next move. The oppressive silence that followed the whisper felt like a heavy shroud, wrapping around his chest, squeezing the breath out of him, making him feel trapped, suffocated by the very air he was breathing. And just as the silence became unbearable, the voice came again, louder, almost deafening now, as if the forest was growing impatient, its presence too powerful to ignore. Leo, you cannot leave. Who's there? Leo called, his voice trembling despite his attempt to sound brave. He could feel the weight of his words as they echoed through the thickening fog, almost swallowed up by the oppressive silence that followed. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, his mouth tasting of fear. The air around him felt thick now, heavier than ever, as if the very forest was breathing, and it was breathing with him. For a moment, there was no answer. Just the cold, still air and the constant thrum of his own heartbeat, pounding in his ears. The flashlight flickered again, and in that brief moment of darkness, Leo thought he saw something move in the corner of his eye. His breath caught in his chest, and he quickly swung the beam back, his hand shaking as he tried to focus. Nothing. But then, out of nowhere, a pair of eyes appeared, just above the ground, glowing softly in the darkness, like two small embers in the black void. Leo's heart leaped into his throat. The faint, unnatural glow of the eyes pierced through the fog, bright against the bleakness. His breath caught in his throat, and instinctively, he took a step backward, every nerve in his body telling him to turn and run. But before he could move, more eyes appeared, dozens of them, then hundreds, until the whole forest seemed to be filled with them. Eyes glowing like lanterns, staring at him from every direction, hidden behind trees, peering out from the dark underbrush, high in the branches, and even at ground level, gleaming through the fog. They were too many to count. Too many to even comprehend. And all of them were fixed directly on him, their gaze unwavering, cold and intense, as though they were waiting for something. Something he wasn't sure he could offer. He felt his pulse quicken, his feet frozen in place as the eyes surrounded him. They didn't blink. They didn't move. Just 1,000 pairs of eyes, unblinking, and all watching him silently. A shiver crawled down his spine as a gut-wrenching thought struck him. These weren't just eyes. These were things. Whatever they belonged to, they weren't human. The glow was unnatural, far too intense, far too precise. The forest itself seemed to pulse around him, as if the trees were alive, and they too were watching. Leo's hands were clammy, the flashlight slipping slightly in his grip as the intensity of the gaze weighed on him. It felt as though the very air around him was vibrating with an ancient, predatory energy. The soft whisper of the wind had stopped altogether, and in its place was an unsettling stillness, a suffocating quiet that pressed in on him from all sides. His breath came in shallow gasps, the fear rising in his throat like bile. What were they? He thought desperately. The trees, no, the forest itself, seemed to close in around him. The glowing eyes were all around now, flickering through the mist like distant stars, and every time he moved, every time he dared to take a step, the eyes followed him, their gaze unblinking, unrelenting. They were waiting, he realized, waiting for him to do something. Anything. Leo felt the weight of their collective gaze pressing on him from every angle. It was as if they were reaching into his very soul, trying to understand him, to read his every thought, to see his every fear. He felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he had never experienced before. It was as though the forest had stripped him of all his defenses, leaving him raw and exposed. The whispering voice he had heard earlier seemed to return in the back of his mind, swirling around him, but now it was different. Stronger, more insistent, more malevolent. Do not move, it seemed to say, do not make a sound. He wasn't sure if the voice was in his head, or if it was coming from the forest itself. But it didn't matter. He knew deep down that if he did anything, if he even dared to make a sound, the eyes would descend upon him, and whatever they belonged to would claim him. Suddenly, one of the eyes moved. It wasn't like the others. It was larger, more distinct, and it moved slowly through the fog, drawing Leo's attention. It was as though it was coming toward him, not in a rush, but deliberately, patiently. The air around it shimmered as it grew closer, the light from the glowing orb casting a strange, unsettling reflection on the ground. For a fleeting moment, Leo thought he saw something. Something behind the eye. A shadow, perhaps? A shape, barely visible but unmistakable in its otherworldly form. His chest tightened. It's not just eyes, he thought, his mind racing. It's something worse. The eyes surrounding him were still, but now this one, the larger one, was getting closer, drawing nearer, and Leo couldn't tear his gaze away from it. It felt as though it were hypnotizing him, pulling him toward it with some invisible force. His breath hitched in his throat, and his body locked in place as the larger eye moved closer, inch by inch, its glowing light casting an eerie glow over the entire clearing. The forest was silent now. Completely, utterly silent, except for the faint, rhythmic sound of Leo's breathing and the low, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to vibrate from the very earth beneath him. He was stuck, unable to move, trapped in this strange, inescapable moment, and as the larger eye inched closer, he could feel something dark, something ancient lurking in the shadows behind it. Something that had been waiting for him. And then, in the next instant, the forest exploded into motion. Leo's body trembled with a cold that seemed to come from deep within him, a chill that made his skin crawl and his teeth chatter. His legs were shaking so violently that for a second, he was sure they would give out from under him. The darkness of the hollow woods closed in around him, a suffocating blanket that seemed to press against his chest, making it harder to breathe with every passing second. The very air felt alive, as if it was watching him, studying him, waiting for him to make a mistake. The voice echoed again, and this time, it wasn't just words. It was a presence, a force that twisted the very fabric of the forest. The trees creaked as though they were groaning in response, their trunks groaning in protest. The leaves rustled, but not in the familiar way they did during a breeze. This was different. This was like whispers carried by something other, something that didn't belong. The world felt off balance, as if the earth itself had begun to tilt, pulling Leo deeper into its suffocating embrace. You've entered the hollow woods, Leo, the voice repeated, its tone colder, sharper. It wasn't just speaking, it was commanding, as though every syllable was tied to the very pulse of the forest itself. And now you will face what lies in the dark. Leo's pulse quickened, his breath shallow. It was as though the forest had recognized him, acknowledged his presence, and now it was claiming him as its own. There was no escaping it, no running from it. He could feel the weight of those words pressing against his soul, sinking into his chest like an anchor, dragging him into the depths of something ancient and terrifying. What lies in the dark? Leo whispered, his voice trembling in the cold, dead silence. His breath formed small clouds of vapor that quickly disappeared into the thick, suffocating fog that surrounded him. He didn't even know if he wanted the answer. But the forest, the voice, the air around him, they all seemed to demand that he ask, that he challenge the unseen force that had already wrapped itself around him like a prison. There was no response. For a moment, everything stood still. The fog hung in the air, thick and oppressive, and the trees stood silent, like ancient sentinels watching over something far darker than anything Leo could ever have imagined. His eyes darted around, desperately searching for any sign of movement, any hint of escape, but there was nothing. The glowing eyes were gone, and with them, the feeling of being surrounded by the unseen. Yet, the presence still lingered, pressing on him from every direction. His flashlight flickered again, casting brief, fleeting shadows that danced across the trees like specters. The beam of light seemed weaker now, as if the woods themselves were fighting against him, fighting to consume the only thing that gave him a sliver of hope. His fingers shook as he tightened his grip on the flashlight, trying desperately to keep it steady. But it wasn't enough. The light flickered once more and then died, leaving him in complete, inky blackness. His heart skipped a beat, the sudden loss of light making his skin prickle with a deep, gnawing terror. It was as though he had been plunged into an abyss, his senses overwhelmed by the oppressive void around him. He couldn't even see his own hands in front of his face. The silence was suffocating, pressing in on him, like the entire forest had taken a deep, collective breath, waiting for something. Then came the laughter. It was a sound so unnatural, so full of malice, that Leo couldn't help but flinch, his whole body shuddering with the sensation of something creeping closer, something that he couldn't see but could feel just beyond the reach of his senses. It echoed through the forest like a low growl, twisting and turning around him, filling the air with a promise of something far worse than anything he could possibly comprehend. The laugh was not one of amusement, but of recognition. As if the woods were laughing at him, at his futile attempt to survive, to escape what had already been set in motion. And as the sound echoed, Leo's thoughts seemed to freeze, his mind blanking for just a moment, unable to process the horror around him. But in that pause, the voice came again, louder now, reverberating through the forest with an almost physical force. "Do you feel it, Leo?" it asked, its tone now laced with a dark, seductive power. The words didn't just fill the space around him, they sank into his bones, into his very soul. The darkness. It is alive, and it has been waiting for you. Leo staggered backward, his breath quickening, his pulse hammering in his ears. He could feel the weight of the words pressing down on him, as though they had somehow entered his mind, entwining themselves with his thoughts, controlling them, suffocating them. The ground beneath his feet seemed to shift, as if the earth itself was moving, groaning with some ancient, long-forgotten hunger. The voice continued, softer now, a whisper that slid into his thoughts like a serpent, wrapping itself around his mind. "You cannot escape. You are part of the woods now. You will face what lies here, Leo. You will face it, and become one with it." The words were a sentence, a decree. The finality of them struck him like a thunderclap, and his legs finally gave out. He fell to his knees, gasping for air as the weight of the forest pressed down on him like 1,000 tons of stone. His head spun, dizziness overtaking him as the world around him seemed to blur and twist. He could feel his body trembling, not just from the cold, but from the sheer terror of knowing he was no longer in control. And then, as if responding to the voice's words, the forest began to move. The trees shifted and groaned, their branches creaking and bending in impossible ways, their leaves rustling with a sound like whispers. The very ground beneath his feet seemed to pulse with a life of its own, as though the forest was breathing, alive with a presence that Leo couldn't escape. The air thickened, heavy with the smell of damp earth and something far more sinister. The metallic tang of blood lingered in the air, faint but undeniable, and Leo's stomach churned with the sickening realization that whatever had been waiting in the hollow woods had already tasted blood, his blood. And now, there was no escape. The woods were alive, and they had claimed him. Out of the fog they emerged, like specters rising from the depths of an ancient nightmare, their massive forms blotting out the faint light of the moon. Their eyes, glowing like burning embers, cut through the darkness, pinpricks of heat in the frigid night. The creatures moved silently, their bodies twisting and shifting as they slinked from the shadows, unfurling themselves from the mist like something that had always existed there, waiting for its moment to step into the world. Leo's breath caught in his throat as he saw them more clearly. Large, imposing figures, their fur dark as the night itself. It shimmered with an otherworldly luster, an unnatural sheen that seemed to absorb the light around them rather than reflect it. The way they moved, fluid and predatory, sent a shiver of pure dread crawling down Leo's spine. They were neither fully animal nor entirely human, a strange amalgamation of both that defied everything he had ever known. Their bodies rippled with sinew, muscles coiling beneath thick, matted fur, but their faces were twisted, warped. Eyes that seemed too large for their skulls gleamed with intelligence, eyes that locked onto Leo with an unsettling precision. They were watching him, studying him, as if they knew everything about him, down to the deepest parts of his soul. Leo stumbled back, his legs shaky beneath him. His mind screamed at him to run, to escape, but his feet felt like they were rooted to the ground. The fog around him thickened, the air growing heavier with every passing second. It was as though the creatures themselves were drawing the very breath from his lungs, holding him captive within their sphere of influence. The Midnight Guardians. Leo had heard the stories, tales passed down through generations, whispered by the firelight in hushed tones. The villagers spoke of them with reverence and fear. They were the protectors of the hollow woods, but not in the way one might think. They weren't guardians in the traditional sense, protecting against danger or harm. No, they were something far more ancient, something older than the forest itself. They existed to keep the balance of the woods, ensuring that its dark secrets remained hidden from the world. And to do that, they had been tasked with a far darker role, to punish anyone foolish enough to trespass on the sacred ground of hollow woods. Legend said they were born from the very essence of the forest, creatures of pure darkness, shaped by ancient forces, with powers beyond human comprehension. Their appearance was said to herald doom for any who encountered them. No one who had ventured into the hollow woods at night had ever returned, and those few who had survived spoke of the Midnight Guardians as beings of immense power, with a hunger that could never be quenched. Some claimed they were demons, others said they were spirits of the forest, bound to protect its secrets from prying eyes. But no matter the legend, the truth was clear. These creatures were not to be trifled with. Leo's pulse thundered in his ears, his mind racing. There were stories, sure, but he had never believed them, not really. No one did. They were just old myths, superstitions meant to scare children into staying close to home. But now, standing in the middle of the hollow woods with the Midnight Guardians closing in on him, Leo realized the truth. The stories were not myths. They were warnings, warnings that had been ignored for far too long. The creatures began to circle him, their glowing eyes never leaving him for a second. Their movements were slow, deliberate, as if savoring the fear that radiated from him. Their breaths came in low, guttural growls, and Leo could feel the weight of their presence pressing down on him, suffocating him with an overwhelming sense of dread. It was as though the very air was charged with something dark and malevolent, something ancient and primal that had no place in the world of men. One of the creatures, larger than the rest, stepped forward, its fur rippling with every movement. Its eyes burned brighter, more intense, as it locked onto Leo with an almost unnatural focus. It moved closer, its massive form casting a shadow that seemed to swallow everything in its path. Leo could feel its gaze, cold and penetrating, as if it could see into his very soul, peeling away the layers of his fear, his confusion, his desperation. "You should not have come here, boy," the creature spoke, its voice low and gravelly, vibrating in the air like a distant thunderstorm. It wasn't speaking with its mouth, but with its mind. Leo could feel the words pressing into his thoughts, heavy and suffocating. "This place is cursed, and so are you for daring to cross its boundaries." Leo's heart hammered in his chest. The voice, if it could even be called a voice, sent chills crawling up his spine. He wanted to speak, to beg for mercy, but the words caught in his throat. He could barely breathe under the weight of their presence, let alone form a coherent thought. The creature took another step forward, its claws clicking against the hard ground with a sound like metal scraping stone. The other guardians, their eyes still glowing with that infernal light, watched, waiting for their leader to speak. Leo's eyes darted between them, his mind racing. There was no way out. The woods were closing in on him, the creatures surrounding him like a noose tightening around his neck. He could feel the oppressive weight of their power, their dominance over this place, and he knew with a deep, visceral certainty that they weren't just protectors of the woods. They were the woods. They were the night, the fog, the darkness that had always been here. The creature's gaze didn't waver. You have trespassed where you were never meant to go. And now, you will pay the price for your curiosity." Leo's stomach twisted, the words hitting him like a punch to the gut. He was trapped. He had no choice but to face whatever punishment they had in store. The creatures, these guardians of the hollow woods, were not there to show mercy. They were there to ensure that their domain remained untouched, uncontaminated by the likes of him. And as Leo stood there, paralyzed by fear, he realized one undeniable truth. He had come here to find his sister, but now he might never leave these woods alive. Leo wanted to run, his body screaming for him to flee, to escape the horror that was closing in on him. But his legs refused to obey, as if the earth itself had reached up and gripped him with unseen iron fingers. Every muscle in his body tensed, a cold sweat beading on his forehead, but still, he could not move. His heart thudded wildly in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears, drowning out everything else, as though it was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. The ground beneath him felt different now, not solid but alive, pulsing with an ancient energy that hummed through his bones. His breath was shallow, ragged, and he could feel the weight of the creature's gaze pressing into him, suffocating him. The air around him felt thick, heavy with the smell of wet earth and something metallic, like the scent of blood. The fog had thickened even further, wrapping itself around him like a suffocating blanket, turning the world into a blur of shadows and faint, flickering light. Every breath felt like it was being drawn from him, and every second seemed to stretch on forever. Then, one of the creatures stepped forward. It moved with a fluidity that was unnatural, its massive form gliding through the fog with ease, as though it was part of the very mist itself. Its eyes, those glowing embers, burned with an intensity that made Leo's skin prickle, and the creature's presence seemed to suck the warmth from the air. The ground beneath Leo's feet seemed to vibrate with the force of its movements, sending a chill through his spine. The creature's fur was as black as the night, a shifting mass of shadow that seemed to absorb the moonlight, leaving only the glowing eyes as a focal point in the darkness. Its face, twisted and distorted, was a grotesque blend of human and beast. Its features were sharp, angular, with elongated fangs peeking out from under its lip, and its ears, too long to be entirely animal, flicked back in an eerie, unnatural way. But it was the voice that made Leo's heart stutter in his chest. "You dare come here, human?" The voice was low, deep, and gravelly, the words slithering out like venom. Each syllable seemed to vibrate through the air, sending a shiver of dread into Leo's very core. It wasn't just the words, it was the power behind them, the weight of an ancient being that had existed far longer than anything human, something beyond time and reason. "This forest is not for your kind." The creature's voice wasn't just heard, it was felt, like a pressure in Leo's head, pressing in on his skull, seeping into his thoughts. He could almost feel it curling around his consciousness, invasive, commanding, like a cold hand reaching deep into his mind. Leo's heart pounded louder, and his eyes flicked from the creature's glowing eyes to the other guardians, their shapes only faintly visible in the fog, but their presence unmistakable. They were closing in, surrounding him in a slow, deliberate circle, their glowing eyes now countless pinpricks of light, each one fixed on him with a predatory intensity. The silence between the creature's words seemed to stretch on forever, making the tension unbearable, thick like a storm that had yet to break. "You do not belong here," the creature continued, its voice now softer but no less dangerous, like the growl of a predator sizing up its prey. "You trespass where none should tread. The hollow woods have their rules, human, and you have broken them." Leo's mind raced, trying to grasp at any last shreds of hope, some way out of this, some reason why he wasn't already lost. He had read the stories, heard the warnings from the villagers, legends of the Midnight Guardians, the protectors of the hollow woods, but nothing had prepared him for this. He had thought it was just a myth, a fairy tale to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods at night. But now, standing in the heart of the forest with these creatures circling him, Leo knew the truth. These were not just legends. These were the keepers of something far older than his world, far older than anything he could comprehend. And now, he was their captive, an intruder in a place where humans were not meant to be. The creature took a slow, deliberate step closer, its eyes never leaving Leo's, and the ground seemed to tremble beneath its weight. Leo wanted to scream, to yell, to run, but his voice failed him. His body felt as though it were made of stone, heavy and unyielding. His heart raced, his breaths shallow, but he was completely paralyzed, unable to move, unable to escape. The creature's voices swirled around him now, whispers that didn't come from anywhere, but seemed to come from everywhere, from the very earth beneath his feet, from the trees that loomed high above, from the very air itself. "You will learn," the creature growled, its eyes burning with a fiery hunger, "that the woods do not forget. The hollow woods take what they are owed, and they will never let you leave." Leo's thoughts raced as the world seemed to spin around him, his body locked in place, unable to move. The creature's eyes bored into him, and for a moment, he thought he saw something shift in them, something beyond mere hunger. It was as though it saw everything, his fear, his desperation, and his regret. The creature wasn't just an embodiment of the forest's darkness, it was a reflection of the very thing Leo feared most, his own powerlessness. And just when Leo thought he couldn't take another second of the creature's gaze, when he thought he might shatter under the weight of its presence, the voice echoed again, softer now, almost like a whisper meant for him alone. "You will understand soon enough," it murmured. "And when you do, it will be too late." Leo took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves, though the chill of fear gripped his chest like icy fingers. His body trembled involuntarily, but he forced himself to stand tall, trying to hide the panic that was slowly creeping up his spine. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to escape, to get away from the terrifying presence that surrounded him. But his mind was focused, laser-sharp, on one single thought, his sister. He swallowed hard, feeling his throat dry as dust. "I'm looking for my sister," he said, his voice wavering slightly, but he pushed forward, forcing the words to come out. She disappeared earlier tonight, and I think she's here, in the hollow woods." The words sounded weak to his own ears, as though they weren't even his. Was it desperation that made him speak, or the need to make sense of the nightmare he was trapped in? He didn't know. But somehow, despite the fear pressing down on him, despite the cold weight of the creature's gazes, Leo kept his eyes locked on the creature in front of him, trying to meet its glowing stare. He could feel the creature's eyes on him, the other midnight guardians watching in complete silence, their presence suffocating him from every direction. The fog seemed to thicken with each passing second, swirling around them like an endless sea, drowning out the world. "You think your sister is here?" The creature's voice was low, mocking, but there was a hint of something else, something deeper, more menacing. It was as if it was savoring Leo's words, testing them, measuring his resolve. "You truly believe she is in the hollow woods, little human?" Leo's heart skipped a beat, and a cold shiver ran down his spine. He didn't know what the creature meant by that, what it was hinting at, but he felt a strange twist of dread in his gut. Was it mocking him? Was it trying to break his hope, to unravel the one thing that had kept him moving forward through the forest, through the terror, through the dark? "Yes," Leo managed to say, his voice growing stronger despite the overwhelming fear threatening to choke him. "I know she's here. I can feel it. She has to be." The creature did not respond right away. Instead, it tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing as though considering Leo's words, studying him in a way that sent a tremor through his bones. Its form was a shifting mass of shadows, but those eyes, the eyes were piercing, unblinking, burning through him. Leo couldn't help but feel that it saw more than just a scared boy standing in front of it. It saw everything. His confusion, his desperation, his doubt. "Do you understand what the hollow woods are, human?" the creature asked, its voice softer now, almost like a lullaby, but the darkness in it was unmistakable. "You enter not just with your feet, but with your soul. Every step you take here is a choice, and every choice has its price." Leo blinked, confused. What do you mean? I don't care about any price. I just need to find her. Please. I need to know what happened. His words spilled out in a rush, a flood of helplessness and frustration. His sister was gone, vanished without a trace, and the only place he hadn't searched was here. The hollow woods. The one place no one in the village dared to go. And now, standing in the midst of these creatures, surrounded by the eerie fog and the relentless whispers of the forest, Leo couldn't help but wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. The creature's glowing eyes flickered, a faint smirk playing on its dark, twisted face. It took a step closer, and Leo could feel the air grow colder, as if the very temperature of the forest had dropped several degrees in an instant. The scent of earth, decaying leaves, and something else, something sour and metallic, pressed in on him. He had never felt so small, so insignificant, as if he were nothing more than a speck in the vast, unknowable expanse of the hollow woods. You seek your sister, the creature continued, its voice deepening with an unsettling resonance. But the hollow woods do not give answers to those who trespass. Not to those who dare ask of its secrets. They take, and they do not return. Leo's stomach churned, and for a moment, the world around him seemed to spin. The creatures were closer now, their glowing eyes never leaving him, their movements so fluid, so unnatural. Leo's heart hammered in his chest as he took a tentative step backward, but his feet were still trapped, weighed down by the unrelenting grip of fear that had taken root inside him. I'll find her, Leo said, more to himself than to the creature. He clutched the flashlight tighter, his knuckles white. I don't care what the woods want or what you say. She's here, and I'm going to bring her back. The creature's laughter echoed through the fog, a sound like 1,000 dry leaves scraping against each other. It wasn't a sound of humor, it was a sound of warning. The woods do not answer to the will of humans, it said, its voice now an eerie hiss that seemed to come from everywhere, surrounding him, closing in. But you may learn that soon enough. If you are brave enough to seek the truth. Leo swallowed hard. His throat was dry, and his pulse was racing, but he refused to give in to the fear. His sister, his little sister, was somewhere out there, and no matter what the hollow woods had in store, Leo wasn't going to stop. He couldn't. The creature's eyes narrowed even further, its glowing orbs dimming for a moment before flaring up again, brighter and more intense than before. Its lips curled into a wicked snarl, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth that gleamed like knives in the pale moonlight. A low, guttural growl rumbled deep within its chest, the sound vibrating through the ground beneath Leo's feet, like a warning too ancient to ignore. You are brave, the creature hissed, its voice dripping with venom. But bravery alone is no match for the hollow woods. The air around them seemed to thicken with each word, heavy with a sense of inevitability. The woods will devour your courage. They will twist your will. You will begin as one thing, but when you leave, if you leave, you will be something else entirely. And your sister, well... It paused, savoring the moment, as if relishing the fear in Leo's eyes. Your sister is already part of it. Leo's heart skipped a beat. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud, suffocating and oppressive. He couldn't make sense of them, but the dread that pooled in his stomach only grew stronger. His sister, was she truly gone, lost to the woods, now part of whatever dark magic ruled this cursed place? The creature took another step closer, its towering form casting an even darker shadow across Leo. Those who enter the hollow woods to rescue others, it continued, its voice now tinged with something like sorrow, but it was a sorrow that was far from comforting. They never leave the same. Oh no. The woods will change them. It's not just the forest you must worry about, it's the shadows. They will whisper to you, call to you, and if you listen too closely, you will become them. The creature leaned down, its face so close now that Leo could feel its hot breath on his skin, thick with the stench of decay and earth. The hollow woods doesn't just trap bodies, boy. It traps souls. Leo clenched his fists harder, his knuckles aching, but he refused to show any weakness. The fear gnawing at him felt like chains, pulling him back, but his determination was stronger. His sister was out there, somewhere in the heart of this nightmare, and he would not leave without her. I don't care what the woods want, Leo said, his voice shaking, but not from fear. It was the tremor of defiance, of refusing to be cowed. I'm getting her back. No matter what it takes. The creature stepped back slightly, its eyes flickering with what almost seemed like amusement. But then its expression darkened, and a deep growl rumbled from deep within its chest. The air around Leo grew colder, the fog curling tighter around him, as though the forest itself was reacting to his words. "You fool," the creature snarled, the sound more animalistic now, raw and vicious. "You don't understand what you're asking. The woods will take everything from you. The shadows will twist your thoughts, your heart, your very soul. You will become part of this forest." A mere whisper in the dark. Its lips curled into a wicked grin. "You will never be the same. No one who enters the hollow woods to rescue another ever is." Leo's heart pounded in his chest, but he refused to back down. He had come too far. He had crossed this cursed threshold, ventured too deep into the nightmarish grip of the forest to turn back now. The images of his sister flashed in his mind, her face, her voice, her laughter. No, he wouldn't let her become part of this. Not if he could help it. "I don't care what I become," Leo said, his voice low but firm. "I'm getting her back, and I won't stop until I do." The creature's eyes flared brighter, as if Leo's defiance had sparked something deep within the darkness. For a long, unbearable moment, the creature stared at him, its glowing eyes searching for something. Perhaps a crack in Leo's resolve. But there was none. With a slow, deliberate motion, the creature lifted its massive clawed hand, its fingers long and twisted like roots. It pointed directly at Leo, its eyes never leaving his face. "Then you will face the consequences of your decision. You will see what lies within the hollow woods. But be warned, human. Once the shadows claim you, they never let go." Leo stood tall, his fists still clenched, his breath coming in shallow bursts, but his resolve had never been stronger. "I'm not afraid of the dark," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling in his chest. "I'll find her. And when I do, I'll bring her home." The creature let out a low, throaty laugh, one filled with both mockery and something far darker, more ancient. "You think you can save her?" it sneered. "You think you can escape the forest's grasp? You are already lost. You just don't know it yet." Leo didn't flinch. He could feel the weight of its words, feel the air growing heavier around him, but he refused to let doubt take root. He wasn't lost. Not yet. With a final, menacing growl, the creature turned and retreated back into the shadows, its form vanishing into the mist as if it had never been there at all. But its words lingered in the air, echoing in Leo's mind like a curse. "You will never be the same, Leo. Remember that." Leo stood there, frozen for a moment, as the fog thickened around him, nearly swallowing him whole. The forest seemed to close in on him, and for the briefest of moments, he wondered if the creature's words were true. Would he change? Would the hollow woods twist him into something unrecognizable? But he couldn't let himself think about that. Not now. His sister was still out there, somewhere in this nightmare. And no matter what it took, no matter the price, he would bring her back. With one final deep breath, Leo set his jaw and took the first step forward into the darkness, knowing that there was no turning back now. The creatures circled Leo, their glowing eyes like embers in the dense fog, burning with an unsettling, otherworldly light that seemed to pierce through the darkness. The air around him crackled with tension, the only sound the rhythmic crunching of dry leaves beneath their massive paws. The forest itself felt alive, watching, waiting. The oppressive silence was broken only by the low growls of the creatures, their dark forms shifting and slinking through the fog with unnatural grace. It felt like a nightmare, a world that bent to the will of the shadows. Leo's breath came in shallow gasps, his heart hammering in his chest as he scanned the creatures. They were more terrifying up close than he'd ever imagined, their fur slick and black as pitch, their forms towering and nearly indistinguishable from the trees that surrounded them. Their eyes, the only thing visible in the dark, gleamed with malice, narrowing as they moved closer, encircling him with deliberate slowness, like predators toying with their prey. His mind raced. How do I fight these things? What am I even up against? He could feel the weight of his fear closing in on him, threatening to overwhelm his senses, but he fought to stay calm. His sister's face flashed in his mind, her laughter, her smile, and it gave him the strength to hold his ground. He wasn't going to die here. Not without a fight. Suddenly, without warning, one of the creatures lunged, its monstrous form blurring through the air in a flash of movement. Leo's heart skipped a beat, but before he could even think, his body reacted on pure instinct. He ducked just in time, narrowly avoiding the creature's claws that slashed through the air, missing him by inches. The sound of its claws scraping against the ground was a sharp, jarring noise that sent a chill down his spine. His mind snapped into focus. I have to move faster. In one swift motion, Leo turned toward the ground, spotting a thick, gnarled branch lying amidst the underbrush. It was a rough, jagged thing. Nothing compared to the power of the creatures before him, but it was all he had. He grabbed it tightly, his fingers digging into the rough bark, feeling the splinters bite into his skin. As he held it in front of him like a makeshift spear, he could feel his legs shaking, the weight of the situation beginning to set in. The creatures circled, their eyes glowing brighter, narrowing as they observed him with unnerving focus. They were calculating, watching, waiting. Leo's pulse thundered in his ears, and the sweat that trickled down his forehead was cold against the chill of the forest. He could hear their breathing now, deep and labored, like they were savoring the moment, waiting for him to make the first move. Then, with a shrill, bone-chilling howl, another creature sprang forward, moving with terrifying speed. Leo barely had time to react. He swung the branch, aiming for the creature's chest, but it was too fast. The creature dodged with unnatural agility, its glowing eyes flashing with cruel amusement. It swung its clawed paw, slashing at Leo's face. He felt a sharp sting across his cheek as its claws grazed him, drawing blood. The pain was searing, but it fueled his rage. With a primal roar, Leo swung the branch again, this time catching the creature on its side. It howled in pain, stumbling backward, its glowing eyes filled with fury. Leo didn't stop. He pressed forward, his body moving on instinct, adrenaline surging through him as he took another swing, catching the creature's outstretched claws mid-air. The creature reeled back, its growl filling the air as it scrambled to regain its balance. But Leo was already moving again, his feet shifting beneath him as he readied the branch for another strike. His heart was pounding, his mind racing, but one thought kept him focused. I will not let them take me. I will not let them take her. The other creatures circled tighter now, sensing the shift in their companion's demeanor. They growled in unison, their voices low and ominous, the sound echoing through the trees like a chorus of darkness. The air around Leo thickened, as if the very atmosphere was pressing down on him, suffocating him with its heaviness. One of the creatures darted forward again, its speed almost blinding, but Leo was ready. This time, he anticipated its move, twisting out of the way at the last second. The creature crashed into a nearby tree with a sickening thud, its body crumpling to the ground. Leo's breath hitched, and for a moment, he dared to think that maybe, just maybe, he had a chance. But the others weren't backing down. The forest seemed to pulse with their rage, the wind picking up once more, whipping around Leo like a living thing. His grip tightened around the branch, his muscles screaming in protest, but he refused to let go. Another creature lunged, its claws gleaming in the moonlight. Leo swung the branch, connecting with its side with a sickening crack. The creature hissed, its glowing eyes wild with fury, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it swiped back at him, the force of its blow knocking the branch out of Leo's hand. The impact sent a shock through his arm, numbing it for a moment, but he managed to stay on his feet. With his bare hands now, Leo balled his fists and charged at the creature. He hit it square in the chest, driving it back with all the strength he could muster. But it wasn't enough. The creature's claws raked across his skin, tearing into him with a ferocity that made him stagger. He was losing ground. He could feel the weight of their eyes on him, the crushing pressure of their presence closing in. But Leo refused to give in. He dug his heels into the earth, pushing forward despite the pain. His thoughts turned to his sister, to the warmth of her smile, and the way her laughter always filled the room. He couldn't fail her. Not now. Not like this. With renewed determination, Leo launched himself at the creature in front of him, throwing every ounce of his strength into his next move. His fists collided with its head, the force enough to make it stagger back, stunned for a moment. Leo took advantage of the pause, grabbing a sharp rock from the ground and using it as a weapon, slashing at the creature's throat. The creature howled in pain, its eyes widening in disbelief as the blood began to pour from its wound. Leo didn't hesitate. He didn't wait for it to recover. With a desperate, frantic surge of energy, he pushed the creature back, the others watching, but not moving. The forest had gone eerily silent for a moment. Leo stood there, chest heaving, his heart racing, his blood dripping from multiple wounds. But he wasn't done yet. Not until he found his sister. The creatures circled, watching him carefully. Their patience was infinite. Leo could feel it in every fiber of his being. But his resolve remained. He was going to survive this. He was going to save her. Leo. A voice echoed from the depths of the forest, faint but unmistakable, cutting through the oppressive silence like a beacon in the night. It was his sister's voice, or at least it sounded like it. Her voice, but tinged with something Leo couldn't place. His heart skipped a beat, and all the noise around him, the growls, the rustling of the creatures, the crackling of the fog, faded into the background. All that mattered in that moment was the voice, the desperate plea that had reached him from the shadows. "Leo, you have to hurry," she called again, the urgency in her tone now rising, trembling. The words were barely audible, but they sent a jolt of panic through his chest. Her voice, it sounded strained, like she was struggling to speak, like someone, was making it hard for her to reach him. The fog around him seemed to press in tighter, the trees bowing as if trying to keep him from hearing her. But Leo didn't care. His sister, his flesh and blood, was in trouble. She was out there somewhere, trapped in this nightmare of a forest, and he wasn't going to let whatever these creatures were do to her what they had done to so many others before. "Leo," the voice called again, faint, distant, but still there, like a fragile thread connecting him to her. He could feel his pulse pounding in his ears as his feet moved on their own, toward the sound of her voice. Every step felt like a struggle against the weight of the air around him, the eerie stillness, and the creatures that circled him. He felt their eyes on him, burning into his back, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't hesitate. But then, her voice cracked. "It's too late for me," she whispered, the words chilling him to his core. Leo's heart twisted at the sound of her broken voice. The air seemed to grow even heavier, and a cold chill ran down his spine. Too late for her? What did that mean? What was happening to her in this place? A flicker of doubt crawled into his mind. Is she lost forever? Was she already one of them? The idea was unbearable. Leo clenched his fists, the weight of the branch still heavy in his hand, as though it were all that stood between him and whatever fate awaited them both. They're changing me," her voice trembled, barely audible over the increasing howl of the wind that began to whip through the trees. "Changing her?" The words hit him like a physical blow. His mind raced, trying to comprehend what she meant. Was she becoming like them? Was she being twisted into one of those creatures, her humanity slipping away, piece by piece? The thought made his stomach churn, and for a moment, he stopped moving. The world seemed to spin around him. "No. I can't lose her. I won't. Please, Leo. You have to get out of here. You don't know what they've done to me. I can't hold on much longer." Her voice trailed off, sounding weaker now, swallowed by the forest's growing presence. The sound of her breath grew shallow, like she was gasping for air, struggling against some invisible force that Leo couldn't see. He felt a knot tighten in his chest, something raw and desperate pushing him forward again. His sister's voice was growing fainter with each passing second, as if the very darkness of the woods was smothering her words. But still, he pressed on. He had to. There was no choice anymore. "I won't leave you," Leo shouted into the abyss of the forest, his voice cracking under the weight of his fear and determination. "I'm coming for you, I swear. Hold on, just hold on." But there was no answer. Only the whistling wind, the creaking trees, and the silence that followed. It was as if the woods had swallowed her voice whole. Leo felt a lump rise in his throat, panic clawing at him. Was she still there? Was she still human? He couldn't tell. The fog seemed to swirl around him, thick and oppressive, blurring his vision. He reached out, his hands shaking as they swept through the air, hoping to grasp onto something, anything, that would lead him to her. But the more he searched, the further her voice seemed to fade. "Leo," her voice called again, but it was almost a whisper now, like it was coming from a great distance. His sister's voice was no longer the familiar, loving sound he had always known. It was distant, hollow, and twisted. The way it reverberated through the fog was like the echoes of something long lost, something that had already crossed into the realm of the impossible. Leo felt the blood drain from his face. His chest tightened, his limbs heavy as though he were sinking into the ground. His mind whirled in a desperate panic. What if she's gone? What if she's already one of them? The question gnawed at him, its edge sharp and cutting, but he refused to let it take hold. He couldn't. Not now. Not when she needed him most. There was no time to question. He had to act. His body moved forward again, pushed by a force he couldn't control, pulled by the echo of his sister's voice. But with each step, the words repeated in his mind, "They're changing me." And the deeper he ventured into the woods, the more it seemed like the forest itself was changing, closing in on him. The shadows grew darker, more oppressive, as if they were reaching out, wrapping around his legs, trying to pull him into their grasp. The creatures, too, seemed to be watching him more intently now. Their glowing eyes never left him as they moved silently in the fog, lurking in the corners of his vision. "Please, Leo," his sister's voice said again, almost inaudible now, "please, before it's too late." The pleading tone shattered him. He couldn't fail her. Not now. Not after everything they'd been through. The weight of her words, her fear, her desperation, pushed him forward with all the strength he had left. He had to find her. He had to get her out of this place before whatever was changing her swallowed her whole. He gritted his teeth, ignoring the dread that crept into his bones, and plunged further into the depths of the hollow woods. There was no turning back now. Only one thing was clear. Time was running out. "Hang on." Leo shouted into the thick, suffocating fog, his voice raw, but filled with a fierce, unshakable resolve. He pushed forward with every ounce of strength in his body, his flashlight now shaking in his hand, casting long, erratic shadows across the ground. "I'm coming. Stay there." The words felt weak even as they left his mouth, swallowed up by the relentless darkness around him. But Leo didn't care. He had to believe that his sister was still somewhere out there, waiting for him, holding on against the tide of evil that seemed to consume everything in these cursed woods. But the Midnight Guardians were relentless. He could hear them now, their massive forms shifting and moving through the fog with an eerie silence, the only sound being the scrape of their claws against the damp earth. It was as though the creatures were born of the shadows themselves, emerging from the darkness with an unnatural grace. Each step they took was deliberate, measured, as if they were playing with him, toying with his fear, testing his will. Their growls were low, menacing rumbles, reverberating through the trees like thunder. Every growl sent a ripple of terror coursing through Leo's body. The creatures moved as one, a silent, terrifying pack, their eyes glowing brighter now, like burning embers in the darkness, focused entirely on him. Leo could feel the heat of their gaze, like the weight of 1,000 eyes pressing into him, suffocating him with their intent. He could barely breathe, the air thick with the metallic scent of something ancient and vile. The fog around him had become oppressive, closing in like an army of tendrils reaching for his throat, squeezing the very life from him. His lungs burned with every breath he took, but still, he pressed forward. "Please, not now," Leo muttered under his breath, trying to push aside the fear gnawing at him. He was close, he could feel it. His sister was out there. He couldn't lose her now. But the Midnight Guardians were closing in, their presence suffocating, every inch of space around him now occupied by their dark, twisted forms. Their massive bodies towered over him, filling his vision with their imposing figures. More shadow than flesh, but still unmistakably real. Leo tightened his grip on the branch, holding it like a shield, though he knew it was nothing more than a poor weapon against these creatures of pure darkness. His knuckles were white from the pressure, his entire body trembling as the creatures stalked closer, their growls now so close, he could feel the vibration in his bones. One of them lunged forward with terrifying speed, its glowing eyes locked onto Leo as it bared its teeth, long and sharp like daggers. Leo barely had time to react, but instinct kicked in. He twisted out of the way, narrowly avoiding the creature's claws as they swiped through the air with a bone-crushing force. The sound of its claws scraping against the earth sent a chill through Leo's spine, and he stumbled, almost falling, but managed to regain his footing just in time. The creature hissed, its form shifting in the fog like a shadow made flesh, circling him with a predatory slowness. The others followed suit, each one moving closer, their eyes never leaving him, their growls increasing in pitch and intensity. Leo's heart pounded in his chest, the sound of it deafening in his ears, as he backed up, his body screaming for him to run, to escape while he still could. But he couldn't. Not without her. His sister was somewhere out there, waiting for him, calling to him through the fog, her voice now distant, but still faintly audible. The thought of leaving her, of abandoning her to whatever fate these creatures had in store for her, was unbearable. "You don't have a choice, boy," one of the Midnight Guardians growled, its voice like gravel scraping against stone, the sound of it slithering through the fog and settling deep in Leo's chest. "You can run, but you won't get far. We are the guardians of this place. And no one, leaves here without us knowing." Leo's throat went dry. The creature's voice was deep, echoing in his skull like a drumbeat, but Leo didn't flinch. He wasn't about to let these creatures scare him off. Not when his sister was at stake. "I will not leave without her," Leo shouted, his voice cracking, but full of fury. "I'll fight for her, no matter what." For a moment, the creatures paused, their eyes glinting in the darkness. The fog seemed to freeze in place, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Leo held his ground, his heart racing in his chest, his body tense with anticipation. "You think you can fight us?" the creature hissed again, a laugh dripping with malice. "You're already too late. You've already crossed into our domain. There is no way back from here. The Hollow Woods takes all who enter, and those who enter to take are no different." Leo's mind raced as he searched for some kind of solution, some way to get past these monsters and reach his sister before it was too late. He knew he had to move fast. The longer he stayed here, the more these creatures would close in on him, the more the woods would warp and twist around him, until he, too, would become another shadow of the forest. "Stay away from her," Leo shouted, gripping the branch with both hands now, ready for whatever was coming. But the creatures were not afraid. They closed in even tighter, the circle around him tightening, their growls rising to a crescendo, their eyes gleaming with hunger. Leo's breath came in quick gasps as his thoughts raced. "I can't let them take her. I can't." And then, without warning, he lunged. The branch swung through the air, a desperate strike toward the nearest creature, the only weapon he had in his defense. The creature howled as it leapt backward, its claws narrowly missing Leo's arm. But before he could react, another creature lunged, its massive form barreling toward him. Leo barely had time to dodge, his heart pounding as the world spun around him. In that split second, Leo's mind snapped back to one thing: his sister. He had to get to her. He had to break through this pack of creatures. He couldn't let them win. Not now. Not ever. And with that thought, Leo did what he never thought he could do. He pushed forward, right into the heart of the Midnight Guardians, no longer afraid. One of the creatures lunged at him again, its claws extended, its mouth open wide, filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth that glinted in the dim light. The ground seemed to shake beneath its powerful legs as it surged forward, faster than Leo had ever expected. Its eyes burned like molten coals, and its breath came in hot, heavy bursts. Leo's heart slammed against his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. This time, Leo stood his ground. He didn't have the luxury of hesitation anymore. His arms were already aching from the strain of holding the branch, but there was no time for weakness. He gritted his teeth, his knuckles white from the pressure as he gripped the branch like a lifeline, his body bracing for the impact. The creature was almost upon him now. He could feel the air being sucked out of the space around him, the shadow of its massive form looming over him like a dark cloud. It was now or never. With a grunt, Leo swung the branch with everything he had. The thick wood cracked through the air, connecting with the creature's face with a sickening thud. The impact echoed through the trees, and for a moment, everything was still. The creature staggered back, its glowing eyes widening in shock as it recoiled from the blow. It shook its head, as if trying to clear the dizziness, its growls more furious now, but there was something in the way it hesitated, a crack in its confidence. It had never expected this from a human. Leo didn't wait for it to recover. His heart raced as adrenaline surged through his veins, every instinct screaming at him to keep moving, to not stop, to not let the fear take hold. But he was running out of time. He needed a plan, and fast. The creature bared its fangs, growling louder, its eyes narrowing as it prepared for another attack. But Leo's mind was racing, searching for a way to use the environment to his advantage. The fog was thick, making everything feel muffled and disorienting, but it also meant he could use the shadows. The dense undergrowth around him was full of twisted roots and low-hanging branches, the forest itself like a labyrinth meant to trap him. As the creature lunged again, Leo barely dodged the swipe of its claws. The sheer force of the creature's strike sent a gust of wind rushing past him, pushing him back a step. His feet slipped on the wet ground, and for a split second, it felt like he might lose his balance completely. Focus. Stay focused, he told himself. His eyes darted around, scanning the trees for any advantage. A plan was forming in his mind, and he needed to act quickly. The creature was closing in on him again, its movements smooth and predatory. Leo could almost hear the snap of its jaws as it advanced. But he wouldn't let it get the best of him. Not now. With a quick movement, Leo swung the branch again, aiming for the creature's face. This time, the strike didn't land as cleanly. The creature dodged, its lithe body swerving with unnerving speed. But Leo wasn't done yet. As the creature shifted its weight, Leo saw his opportunity. Without thinking, he threw himself to the side, diving toward a cluster of twisted roots and rocks. He scrambled, his fingers scraping against the rough surface, and just as the creature lunged for him, Leo found what he was looking for. A thick vine hanging from a nearby tree. It was long, strong, and thick, perfect for what he needed. He grabbed it without hesitation, his heart pounding as he wrapped the vine around his hand and yanked. The vine creaked under his grip, but it held steady. The creature was already charging again, its eyes glowing brighter than ever, but Leo was ready now. He swung the vine at the creature's legs with all the force he could muster. The vine lashed out, wrapping around the creature's limbs with surprising strength. The creature howled in rage as it tried to break free, but the vine held fast. It stumbled, its momentum lost, and it crashed to the ground with a deafening thud. The shock of the impact reverberated through the forest, the sound echoing in all directions. For a brief moment, Leo stood there, panting, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had actually managed to bring one down. The creature lay twitching on the ground, its glowing eyes still burning with anger, but it was momentarily incapacitated, struggling against the vine that now held it in place. Leo's mind raced. He couldn't afford to waste time. He had to get to his sister. He had to keep moving. The other creatures had been watching, waiting for their moment to strike. But now, seeing one of their own brought down, they seemed to hesitate for a moment, an opening. Leo knew this was his chance to get ahead. Without looking back, he darted toward the fog, pushing through the dense brush as his thoughts stayed fixed on his sister. Every step was fueled by a singular purpose. But even as he ran, he could hear the creatures recovering, their growls rising in fury as they gave chase, relentless and determined. Leo knew this would not be over easily. One of the creatures lunged at him again, its form blurring with unnatural speed as it closed the distance between them. Leo's heart raced, the pounding of his pulse in his ears nearly drowning out the growls and snarls of the creatures around him. The air grew thick with tension, the fog swirling like a living thing, swirling in and out of the trees, closing in on him. Leo could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He wasn't just fighting for his life anymore, he was fighting for his sister. The creature's claws gleamed in the weak light of his flickering flashlight, and before Leo could react, it was almost upon him. But Leo wasn't the same frightened boy who had first entered the woods. In the face of this nightmare, something had awakened within him, a desperate surge of bravery, the raw instinct to protect those he loved. As the creature's claws came down, Leo gritted his teeth and swung the branch with every ounce of strength he had left. The wood made a sharp cracking sound as it connected with the creature's face. The blow landed with more force than he'd expected, and the creature staggered back, its glowing eyes wide with surprise and pain. Its body twisted awkwardly, disoriented by the impact. For a moment, the creature seemed stunned, taken aback by the sheer force Leo had managed to summon. Leo's breath came in ragged gasps. His muscles screamed in protest from the effort, his arms trembling from the weight of the branch. But he couldn't stop now. He couldn't falter. He couldn't afford to lose his focus. The creature was regaining its balance too quickly, and Leo knew that if he didn't act fast, it would pounce again. The thing was faster than him, stronger than him. And it wasn't alone. Leo knew this was only the beginning. He glanced around, eyes darting over the forest, scanning for any kind of advantage. The creatures were circling, their eyes burning like fiery embers in the dense mist, waiting for an opening. The trees around him seemed to close in, their twisted, gnarled branches blocking his view of any escape. There was no obvious way out. His mind raced, searching for a solution, for any possibility that could give him the upper hand. But every second counted. The fog thickened, suffocating the space around him, as if the woods themselves were conspiring against him. The creature he had just struck was still staggering, but it was regaining its footing. Its eyes locked onto him once more, its lip curling in a snarl that sent a chill down Leo's spine. He could feel it, its hunger, its rage. It wasn't just defending itself, it was toying with him, waiting for the right moment to strike, to end this once and for all. Think, Leo. Think. He screamed internally. He couldn't rely on brute force. The branch was sturdy, but it wasn't enough to keep fighting these creatures. Every time he landed a blow, it only seemed to enrage them more. Leo had to outsmart them. His eyes shifted to his surroundings once more, desperately seeking a chance, a way to turn the tide. His mind locked onto the underbrush, the dense, tangled mess of roots, brambles, and low-hanging vines. If he could lead them into the forest's labyrinth, maybe he could trap them. Maybe he could use the terrain to his advantage. But how? As the creature lunged again, Leo had only a split second to act. Instinct took over. He sidestepped just in time, letting the creature's claws swipe at thin air. The force of the lunge threw it off balance, and Leo didn't hesitate. He spun, swinging the branch again, this time aiming for the creature's legs. The blow landed with a sickening crack. The creature let out a roar of pain, but it wasn't enough to incapacitate it. It was still too strong, too fast. Leo's hands were slick with sweat, and his grip was starting to falter. His body was beginning to burn with exhaustion, his heart hammering with fear and desperation. He knew he couldn't keep this up for long. Suddenly, the creature's massive form twisted violently, and before Leo could react, the claws raked across his side, the sharp tips slicing through his jacket and tearing into his flesh. Pain shot through him like lightning, and he gasped, stumbling backward. His breath caught in his throat as he clutched at his side, feeling the warm blood begin to soak through his shirt. But there was no time to stop, no time to let the pain overtake him. The moment he hesitated, the creatures would pounce, and his sister would be lost forever. Leo forced himself to stand tall, despite the growing weakness in his legs. His eyes, wild and frantic, searched the shadows again. He wasn't ready to give up, not when he was so close, not when his sister was depending on him. The creatures began to circle him once more, their movements slow but deliberate. They were closing in, and the air around him seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. Leo's breath was ragged, and his limbs felt like lead. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to escape while he still could, but he couldn't. He wouldn't. Think. The fog thickened, the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, and the creature's eyes blazed in the darkness, waiting for him to make a mistake. And as their growls grew louder, their movements more synchronized, Leo knew something had to change. His fingers tightened around the branch once more, the pain from his side a distant throb in the background. He needed to move, to get out of this trap. And if the forest wasn't going to let him go, then he would make it let him go. Leo's heart pounded in his chest as he stood firm, surrounded by the midnight guardians. Their eyes burned like fiery embers in the dark, their hulking forms casting terrifying shadows on the forest floor. The weight of their words hung heavy in the air, threatening to crush his resolve. The Heartstone belongs to the woods. You will never leave the same. But Leo wasn't about to back down. Not now. Not after everything he had endured to get here. His sister's voice echoed in his mind, her words of desperation filling him with a renewed sense of purpose. Leo, you have to hurry. It's too late for me. They're changing me. The memory of her plea burned in his soul, driving him forward with a determination he hadn't known he had. The creatures circled, their movements fluid and predatory, their low growls vibrating through the air like the distant rumble of thunder. They were waiting for him to falter, to show fear, to back off. They wanted to see him break. But Leo wasn't afraid anymore. He had crossed a threshold that he couldn't turn back from. There was no turning back. With a deep breath, Leo stood taller, straightening his posture as he gripped the fallen branch tighter in his hands. He didn't know where the strength came from, but it surged through him, empowering him to face the darkness head-on. His thoughts sharpened like a blade, focusing only on the one thing that mattered, finding the Heartstone. He could almost feel the ground beneath him tremble with the presence of the forest, as if it itself were alive, breathing with the slow, rhythmic pulse of ancient power. The woods had lived for centuries, twisted in their own dark way, and no human had ever dared challenge them. But Leo wasn't like the others. He wasn't going to let fear stop him. He had something the creatures didn't understand, a purpose. The guardian that had spoken to him, the largest one with fur so dark it seemed to absorb the moonlight, stepped closer, its glowing eyes narrowing as it studied him. Its lips curled back into a snarl, revealing teeth like jagged shards of stone. "You think you're special, human?" It growled, the sound vibrating in the still air. "You think you're different from the others? We have seen your kind come and go, and none have ever lived to tell the tale." Leo didn't flinch. His gaze was steady as he met the creature's stare. "I don't care about the others. I'm here for my sister, and I'm not leaving without her." His voice cracked with emotion, but it was strong, steady, fueled by the determination that had been building within him ever since he first set foot in the forest. The guardian snarled, its eyes flashing with malice. "You think you can break the curse? You think you can take the Heartstone from us? The forest will never let you leave. It will twist you, change you, turn you into one of us." Leo's breath caught in his throat, but he didn't let the creature's words sink in. "One of us." The thought sent a shiver down his spine. He could already feel the weight of the forest pressing in on him, the dense fog wrapping around him like a suffocating blanket. But he had come too far to turn back now. The memory of his sister's voice was like a beacon in the darkness, a light in the suffocating gloom. She was depending on him. The guardians, the creatures, the curses, they were nothing compared to the love he had for her. He couldn't let her fall into their grasp. With a sudden burst of resolve, Leo turned and started moving toward the heart of the woods. The creatures didn't try to stop him at first. They watched him with an amused curiosity, their eyes glinting in the dark. But Leo didn't stop. His feet moved on their own, carrying him deeper into the forest, the ground shifting underfoot with every step. He could feel it now, the pressure of the forest growing stronger. The trees seemed to press in on him, their branches like fingers reaching out to snatch him away. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of decay and earth. The fog swirled around him, and the faint whisper of the wind was replaced by a silence so profound it felt like the forest itself was holding its breath. Leo swallowed hard, pushing forward despite the fear clawing at his chest. He had to reach the Heartstone. He had to. The further he walked, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. His flashlight flickered in his hand, casting only fleeting shadows as it struggled to pierce the impenetrable darkness. Every noise seemed to echo unnervingly around him, and with each step, the forest seemed to come alive, whispering in a language he couldn't understand. Suddenly, a movement to his left caught his attention. He spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. Was it one of the creatures? His breath caught, his senses heightened. But it wasn't the Midnight Guardians. No, this was something different. Something far worse. Through the trees, Leo saw something shift, a dark silhouette that flickered like a shadow. His pulse quickened, and a cold shiver ran down his spine. Something was watching him. Something old and ancient, something that had been waiting in the forest for centuries. The whisper came again, soft and seductive, winding its way through the fog. "You cannot escape what the woods have set in motion. You are too late. The Heartstone belongs to us." Leo shook his head, trying to clear the images from his mind. He couldn't let the forest manipulate him, couldn't let it pull him into its twisted grip. His sister needed him. The Heartstone was the only way to save her, and himself. "I'll find it," Leo whispered to himself, his voice trembling, but filled with fierce determination. "I'll find the Heartstone. And when I do, I'll destroy it." The fog seemed to part just slightly ahead of him, revealing a narrow, winding path. It was treacherous, the ground slick with damp moss and hidden roots, but Leo didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, ignoring the twisting, screeching voices of the forest that seemed to call to him, trying to draw him off course. As Leo moved deeper into the heart of the hollow woods, he realized one thing. He wasn't just fighting for his sister anymore. He was fighting for everything the woods had taken, for all the lives the forest had claimed, for every whisper that had haunted his childhood. He was fighting to end the curse, to break the chains that had bound the village to the dark, endless night of the hollow woods. The Heartstone was close. He could feel it in his bones. He didn't know how, but he knew. And no matter what happened, he would find it. He would take it. And then, he would destroy it. The guardians stood motionless, their glowing eyes fixed on Leo as if they were weighing his very soul, deciding whether to allow him to continue or end him right there. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the weight of centuries-old power. Leo could feel their eyes on him, but he didn't dare look back. He wasn't going to wait for their approval, not after everything he had sacrificed to get this far. Without another thought, Leo lunged forward, pushing past the creatures. His breath came in ragged gasps as he ran, heart pounding in his chest, every footfall echoing in the dead silence of the forest. The Midnight Guardians didn't move at first, as though they were contemplating his audacity. But Leo wasn't going to give them time to act. His feet pounded against the uneven ground, the trees around him seeming to grow taller, their twisted branches reaching out like dark hands, trying to grab him, to pull him back into the depths of the forest. The fog, thick and suffocating, rolled in heavier with each step, wrapping around him like a living thing. The further he ran, the more surreal the forest became. The shadows stretched unnaturally long, twisting and warping as if the very trees were bending and contorting to follow him. Every branch that snapped in the distance sent a shiver down his spine, and the air grew colder, thick with an oppressive energy that pressed in from all sides. The mist seemed to blur his vision, disorienting him, making every direction look the same. He could almost hear the whispers of the forest, a low murmur in the back of his mind, urging him to turn back, to give in to the darkness. But Leo kept running, forcing his legs to move, determined not to stop until he found the Heartstone. His muscles burned, his breath ragged in the freezing air, but the thought of his sister kept him going, pushing him forward. She needed him. He had come so far, faced so many dangers, and now finally, after what felt like an eternity of running through the shifting maze of the hollow woods, he stumbled upon something that made his heart skip a beat. A clearing. A break in the suffocating fog. In the center of the clearing stood the Heartstone. It pulsed with a sickly, otherworldly light, casting an eerie glow that seemed to ripple through the ground beneath Leo's feet. The stone was massive, its surface smooth but etched with ancient, glowing runes that pulsed in time with the rhythm of the forest. There was something almost hypnotic about it, something that seemed to call out to him from the depths of his very being. The power emanating from it was tangible, filling the air with an electric charge that seemed to hum through his bones. Leo's heart raced as he approached, his eyes fixed on the stone. The ground beneath his feet trembled, and the air seemed to grow heavier with every step he took. His instincts screamed at him to stop, to run, but he couldn't. His sister's voice echoed in his mind, her cries for help, the desperation in her tone. "It's too late for me. They're changing me." Leo knew he had no choice. He had come all this way for her, and there was only one thing left to do. As he reached out to touch the Heartstone, his hand trembled. The power that radiated from it was unlike anything he had ever felt before. It was ancient, vast, and so potent that it felt like it could swallow him whole. The stone's glow pulsed brighter, the light intensifying, filling the entire clearing with a blinding brilliance. For a moment, Leo hesitated. Something deep within him, some primal instinct, warned him that he was standing on the edge of something dangerous, something beyond his understanding. But then, his sister's face flashed in his mind, her eyes wide with fear, her voice pleading for help. Leo pushed aside his doubts, reaching out with both hands, his fingers brushing against the cool surface of the stone. The moment his skin made contact, a surge of power shot through him, as if the Heartstone had awoken from a long dormant slumber. A shock of energy coursed through his veins, filling him with a dizzying rush of power and fear. It was as though the stone was alive, reacting to his touch, drawing him into its grasp. The ground beneath him cracked, sending tremors through the earth, and the wind howled through the trees. The Guardians had to be close now, but Leo couldn't focus on them. He had to focus on the Heartstone. He had to take it, to break its hold over the hollow woods, and free his sister from whatever dark magic had claimed her. A voice echoed from the shadows, low and menacing. You think you can just take it? You think you can break the bond we share with the forest? The words sent a chill through Leo's spine, but he didn't pull his hand away. The hot stone's power thrummed beneath his skin, urging him on. I don't have a choice, Leo muttered under his breath, the words barely audible above the pounding of his heart. I'll do whatever it takes. His fingers dug deeper into the stone, and with a final, desperate push, he yanked it free from the ground. The moment he did, a deafening roar filled the air, and the forest seemed to explode in a fury of movement. The trees groaned, the earth shook, and the air crackled with energy. Leo stumbled backward, clutching the heart stone to his chest. Its power was overwhelming, threatening to consume him, to pull him under. But he couldn't stop now. He had come too far, sacrificed too much. His sister was depending on him. Leo turned toward the clearing's edge, where the fog seemed to part just enough to reveal the dark silhouettes of the Midnight Guardians. They were closing in, their glowing eyes fixed on him, their shadows stretching long and dark as they moved. The heartstone pulsed violently in his hands, as if reacting to the Guardian's presence. Leo's breath caught in his throat. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. But even with the heartstone in his grasp, he knew that the hardest part was yet to come. As his hand brushed against the surface of the heartstone, a deep, resonant hum vibrated through the air, as if the entire forest was responding to his touch. The trees creaked and swayed, their limbs shifting and groaning, the leaves rustling in a way that felt alive, like the forest was awakening from a long-forgotten slumber. The fog seemed to lift just a little, swirling in dizzying patterns as if caught in the same pulse of energy that was emanating from the heartstone. The atmosphere around him thickened, the air charged with an electric tension that seemed to crackle against his skin, sending jolts of power through his veins. Leo's heart raced as the world around him seemed to shift. The ground beneath his feet rumbled, a deep tremor that felt like the very foundation of the forest was beginning to stir. He could hear it now, the low growl of the Midnight Guardians. Their silhouettes appeared from the shadows, their glowing eyes burning with malevolent intent. There were more of them now, creeping out of the darkness, their enormous forms blocking the edges of the clearing like a living wall of pure terror. Despite the overwhelming fear that threatened to overtake him, Leo stood his ground. The heartstone pulsed in his hand, its light growing brighter with each passing second. It was as though the power within the stone had recognized him, responding to his determination. Leo could feel it flowing through him, its energy surging in his chest like a powerful river. His muscles tensed, the strength of the stone fusing with his very being, making him feel invincible. The lead guardian stepped forward, its eyes narrowing with contempt. You cannot control it, it hissed, its voice like gravel scraping against stone. The creature lunged forward, its massive claws outstretched, moving with terrifying speed, aiming directly at Leo's throat. But Leo was ready. His pulse quickened, and in an instant, the energy of the heartstone surged through him, filling every fiber of his body with a sense of purpose, power, and clarity. He raised his free hand toward the guardian, his fingers trembling but determined. The energy from the heartstone flowed like wildfire through his limbs, spreading into the ground beneath him. His body became a conduit for the ancient magic that had lived in the forest for centuries. The earth beneath their feet cracked, splitting open with a deafening roar as the power of the heartstone reached its apex. The ground trembled violently, sending shards of rock flying into the air. The guardians skidded to a halt, their eyes wide with shock and fury as the ground began to break apart, fissures opening wide like gaping mouths threatening to swallow them whole. The very foundation of the hollow woods seemed to rebel against their presence. Leo could feel the guardians' power, their malevolent energy, crashing against the force of the heartstone, but it was no match. His hand lifted higher, the glowing stone pulsating brighter with each passing second, as if it were feeding off his determination. The light that radiated from it grew into a blinding beacon, enveloping the clearing in its brilliance. The guardians recoiled from it, their glowing eyes flickering as the blinding light consumed them. Their forms, once dark and imposing, began to flicker and fade, their shadows retreating into the light as if they were being drawn away, pulled by an invisible force. The sound of their growls and roars filled the air, a cacophony of rage and desperation as they fought against the light that seemed to devour them. But the heartstone's power was too strong. With a final, agonized cry, the midnight guardians were consumed by the blinding radiance, their bodies dissolving into the light, their voices echoing through the woods as they vanished into nothingness. The ground beneath Leo's feet shook once more before it fell silent, the oppressive tension in the air dissipating as quickly as it had come. For a moment, all that remained was the sound of Leo's ragged breathing and the fading echoes of the guardians' cries. The fog began to lift, the trees settling back into their silent, ancient watch over the woods. Leo stood alone in the clearing, the heartstone still glowing brightly in his hand. The energy of the stone hummed in his chest, but he could feel it beginning to fade, its immense power slowly ebbing away as the last remnants of the guardians dissolved into the ether. Leo's legs trembled with exhaustion, the weight of what he had just done sinking in. He had faced the impossible and emerged victorious, but the cost was still unknown. He glanced down at the heartstone, its glow dimming, its power spent. And for a fleeting moment, as the forest fell silent, Leo couldn't shake the feeling that the forest, though free of the guardians, still held its secrets, and that he might not be finished here yet. And then, just like that, the forest was silent. The earth beneath him settled, the tremors of the battle now nothing more than a distant memory. The oppressive weight that had hung in the air like a storm cloud evaporated, leaving only an eerie calm. The thick fog that had swallowed the woods for what felt like an eternity began to lift, retreating into the shadowed corners of the forest as if it were afraid of the power that had just been unleashed. The trees, once bent and gnarled, seemed to straighten, their towering forms regaining some semblance of their ancient grace. The leaves, which had once whispered with the secrets of the guardians, were now still, like the forest itself was taking a deep, relieved breath. And above all, the moon. It rose higher in the sky, its silver light casting a pure, unblemished glow over the clearing. It bathed the scene in an otherworldly radiance, brighter than Leo had ever seen before. It felt as though the very heavens themselves were acknowledging the end of the curse that had plagued the hollow woods for so long. The light shimmered off the heartstone, now dimmed to a soft glow in his hand, its power spent but not gone. It was a symbol of the strength he had summoned to face the dark, and it seemed to hum softly in his grasp, like the final note of a long and difficult symphony. Leo stood in the center of the clearing, his heart pounding in his chest, his body still trembling from the battle. He took a slow breath, inhaling the fresh, clean air that now seemed to fill the woods, untainted by the darkness that had once ruled them. The chill of the night no longer felt oppressive, instead it was soothing, like the world was finally at peace. He looked around, scanning the familiar trees, the twisted branches that had once seemed so threatening now standing tall and majestic, like sentinels guarding this new calm world. The rustling of leaves, once a sign of hidden dangers, now sounded like the quiet whispers of the forest at rest. Everything felt different now. The woods had been freed, but so had he, free from the fear, the uncertainty, and the weight that had pressed upon him since he first entered the hollow woods. And then, he saw her. His sister. At first, she appeared as a small figure standing in the distance, just beyond the edge of the clearing. Leo's breath caught in his throat. There was no mistaking it. The figure was unmistakably her. No longer a shadow, no longer distorted by the cursed magic that had taken hold of her. Her features were clear, her eyes wide with relief, no longer clouded with the dark energy that had tried to consume her. Her hair shimmered softly in the moonlight, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Leo saw her as he remembered. Her smile, her warmth, the familiar presence that had once brought him comfort. "Leo," she cried, her voice carrying across the clearing like a sweet melody after a long silence. The sound of her voice was everything. Everything he had fought for, everything he had risked. It was like hearing a song he thought he would never hear again. The tension in his chest melted away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of relief, of victory. Without thinking, Leo took a step forward, then another, and before he even realized it, he was running. His legs moved of their own accord, fueled by the sheer force of his need to reach her, to make sure she was truly there, truly safe. Her figure grew clearer with every step, the distance between them closing faster than he could have imagined. As he ran, he could feel the raw, almost desperate urge to be near her again, to hold her, to make sure she was real, that she wasn't just another illusion of the cursed forest. The path before him seemed to open up, as if the very earth was guiding him toward her, clearing the way. The air around him felt lighter, warmer, and as he reached her, he saw the tears in her eyes. Tears of joy, of sorrow, of everything that had happened between them. She reached her arms out to him, and without a second thought, he closed the distance. "Leo, I thought I was lost forever," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion as they embraced. Her hands trembled as they clung to him, like she was afraid to let go, afraid that if she did, she might disappear once more into the darkness. "You're not lost," Leo said, his voice hoarse with relief. "You're here. You're safe." She pulled back slightly to look at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to make sense of everything that had happened, of the impossible things they had just witnessed. How did you do it? I thought there was no way out." Leo's eyes softened. He looked around at the forest, at the calm that had settled in, and at the heartstone still glowing faintly in his hand. "The heartstone," he said quietly. "It was the key. It was the only way to break the curse. The Guardians, they were bound to it. Once I destroyed their hold over it, everything else fell apart." She nodded, her face reflecting a mixture of wonder and disbelief. "But I don't understand. How did you survive them? How did you?" Leo shook his head, smiling faintly. "I had no choice. I wasn't going to lose you." His sister's eyes softened, and she reached up to touch his cheek, her fingers brushing the dust and dirt from his face. She smiled, her lips trembling slightly as if the weight of the past hours was finally catching up to her. "You were brave, Leo. You didn't give up." They stood there for a moment, the world around them still and peaceful, as if the forest itself was sharing in their relief. And as Leo held his sister close, the sound of their breathing the only noise that filled the clearing, he realized something. They had won. They had defeated the darkness together, and now, nothing could take that away from them. But even as they embraced, something deep within Leo's gut stirred, a feeling, an intuition, that despite all that had happened, the hollow woods were not done with them yet. The peace they now felt could be fleeting. The heartstone had been destroyed, but the ancient forest still held its secrets. And as the night stretched on, Leo knew their journey was far from over. But for now, in this moment, he had his sister back. And that was enough. He collapsed to his knees, his legs buckling under the weight of exhaustion. The battle had drained him. Every inch of his body felt like it had been pushed to its absolute limits. His breath came in ragged gasps, each inhale trembling as he tried to regain some semblance of control. His heart was still pounding in his chest, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away, leaving him with a deep, bone-weary fatigue that made it hard to focus. He didn't care, though. He couldn't think of anything except the relief flooding through him, that crushing, overwhelming sense that he had done it. He had saved her. "You're safe. You're really safe," he whispered, as if saying it aloud might somehow make it even more real. His eyes locked on her face, seeing the softness in her expression, the calmness in her eyes that he hadn't seen in what felt like a lifetime. The fear, the darkness, the twisted curse that had once held her was gone. She was herself again, standing in front of him, no longer lost, no longer an unknown shadow in the forest. His sister smiled, and for a moment, the whole world seemed to pause. The soft, genuine curve of her lips was the lightest thing in the world, and it was like a balm to his wounded spirit. It was a smile of relief, of gratitude, and of pure, overwhelming joy. Her eyes sparkled in the moonlight, a gentle, quiet understanding reflected in their depths. She looked at him like he was the only thing that mattered, the only person who could have pulled her out of that nightmare. "I knew you'd come for me," she said, her voice filled with warmth, like the last pieces of the storm had finally passed. "You always do." Her words hit him like a wave. They were simple, yet they carried the weight of everything he had done, everything he had endured to get here. He remembered the moments of fear, the doubts that had crept in during his journey through the hollow woods. He had faced monsters, darkness, and an entire cursed forest, all for her. And yet, through it all, there was that single thought that kept him going. He would not let her be lost. She knelt down beside him, her hand reaching out to touch his shoulder with a tenderness that took him by surprise. The strength he had relied on, the determination that had driven him through the dark, was suddenly replaced by a deep, all-encompassing vulnerability. He had never realized how much of himself he had given away in the search for her, how much of his own spirit he had poured into saving her. Now that it was over, now that the curse had lifted and the battle was won, he could feel it all crashing down on him at once. "You don't have to say anything," she added, her voice soft and soothing as she leaned closer, placing her forehead against his. I've known how hard you fought for me. I've felt it in my heart the whole time." Leo closed his eyes, savoring the comfort of her presence. He had dreamed of this moment, the moment when he could finally let go of the fear, the anxiety, and the pain that had gripped him since the day she had disappeared. And now, with her here, safe, right in front of him, he felt like he could finally breathe again. The weight on his shoulders had been unbearable, but now, it was gone. He wasn't sure how long he had been holding his breath, but it felt like a lifetime. "Thank you, Leo," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't think I would ever be free. I thought I'd be lost in that place forever." The sincerity in her words hit him harder than he had expected. For so long, all he had known was the cold, harsh edge of the hollow woods, the unyielding darkness, the constant battle. But hearing her voice, hearing her say that she believed in him, in them, was like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. He hadn't just saved her, he had saved them both. Leo took her hand, squeezing it gently, like he never wanted to let go. For a moment, neither of them spoke, simply holding each other in the stillness of the forest. It was as if the world had fallen away, leaving just the two of them, untouched by the horrors they had faced. The forest had been consumed by darkness, but here, in this moment, there was nothing but light. He looked up at the sky, watching as the moonlight bathed the clearing, the soft light casting long, quiet shadows over the forest floor. Everything was peaceful now. The trees, the earth, the air. It all felt alive in a way that it hadn't in so long. The weight of the curse had lifted, and now, in the moonlight, the hollow woods seemed to breathe in a way that felt like rebirth. "Whatever happens next," Leo said, his voice quiet but steady, "we'll face it together." His sister smiled again, the warmth in her eyes blooming like a sun breaking through the clouds. "Together," she echoed softly. And in that moment, Leo realized that no matter what they had faced, no matter what was still to come, there was nothing that could tear them apart. They had survived the worst the hollow woods could throw at them, and now they were free. For the first time in what felt like forever, Leo finally let out a breath, feeling the full weight of his relief. He had done it. He had saved her. And now, nothing else seemed impossible. Leo and his sister returned home, stepping carefully over the threshold, their feet landing in the familiar soil of the village. The weight of their journey was still pressing on them, but it felt lighter now, as though the heavy fog that had surrounded their hearts had finally lifted. The world around them seemed different, as if the very atmosphere had changed in response to the trials they had faced in the hollow woods. The air felt fresher, the breeze seemed gentler, and the once ominous landscape of the forest now appeared distant, like a faded memory. No longer did the trees seem to loom over them. Instead, they stood in peaceful silence, their branches swaying in a soft rhythm as if to say, "It is over." The village, which had always felt small and predictable, now seemed like a sanctuary, a place of safety after the chaos of the past days. The warm, welcoming glow of the lanterns lit the cobblestone streets, and the smell of their mother's cooking wafted through the air, a scent of home, of love, of life continuing despite the darkness they had just overcome. The familiar sounds of village life echoed in the background, the distant chatter of neighbors, the soft clatter of horses' hooves against the cobbles, the gentle creak of doors opening and closing. Everything felt right again. Leo looked over at his sister, her face still flushed with the adrenaline of their escape. Her eyes, which had been clouded with fear and doubt just hours ago, were now clear and full of life. The strange, otherworldly transformation that had taken hold of her in the hollow woods was gone, replaced by the soft, familiar glow of the sister he thought he had lost forever. She smiled at him, a small but heartfelt smile that held all the gratitude and relief she couldn't put into words. She had been through so much, and so had he, but here they were, standing together victorious. They didn't speak for a long time, neither of them needing to say anything. The battle they had fought, the horrors they had witnessed, the fear they had carried with them, those things didn't need to be verbalized. They had lived through it together. And now, in the comfort of home, in the safety of each other's presence, there was nothing left but silence, peace, and the quiet understanding that they had made it out of something that could have destroyed them. From that night onward, the hollow woods were never the same. The midnight guardians, those creatures of nightmare and shadow, were gone, erased from existence by the light of the Heartstone. The forest that had once held an ancient and terrible power now stood dormant, as if finally at peace with itself. The fog, which had once swallowed everything it touched, began to clear, revealing the true beauty of the woods, the towering trees, the delicate flowers that bloomed under the moonlight, the peaceful stillness that had been overshadowed by fear for so long. It was as if the forest itself had been freed from a curse that had bound it for centuries. No longer would the whispers of fear drift through its branches. Instead, there was calm. And in that calm, Leo knew something had changed within him, too. He had entered the hollow woods as a young man with little more than a desperate hope to save his sister. He had left it as someone else entirely. The battle, the danger, the terror of facing those creatures, all of it had shaped him into something stronger, something more certain. The courage he had found in the face of unimaginable odds had built a foundation inside him that nothing would ever be able to shake. His heart was no longer ruled by fear, and his resolve had solidified into something unbreakable. The experience had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. Every now and then, Leo would return to the edge of the forest, not as a boy running from the dark, but as a man who had conquered it. Standing at the threshold where the trees met the open land, he would look into the woods, recalling the events of that fateful night. The creatures, the heartstone, the courage it had taken to make it through. It all felt like a dream now, a surreal chapter in his life that had ended in victory. But the lessons it had taught him stayed with him, etched deep in his mind and soul. He knew that sometimes, the greatest challenges were the ones that forced us to face not just the monsters in the world, but the ones within ourselves. And in doing so, we found the strength to conquer both. As he stood at the edge of the forest, his sister often beside him, Leo would think back on everything they had been through. The uncertainty, the danger, the darkness that had seemed to close in on them at every turn. But they had survived it. They had faced it together. And together, they had found a way out. Leo's sister, too, found herself at peace again. Though the memories of what had happened in the hollow woods would never fully leave her, she no longer carried the weight of fear or confusion. Instead, she carried the knowledge that no matter what life threw at them, they could face it, together. They had proven that nothing, not even the darkest force in the world, could break them. And still, even in the peace they had found, Leo would sometimes lie awake at night, the soft rustling of the wind outside his window reminding him of that world he had left behind. He could still hear the faint whispers of the forest, like the call of something just beyond the reach of the mind. He could still feel the weight of the heartstone in his hand, the surge of power that had flowed through him in that moment of truth. And he knew that, no matter how peaceful their lives were now, there would always be more to the world than what met the eye. As he drifted off to sleep, a quiet smile tugged at his lips. This was my adventure, he thought, but tomorrow, there might be another. The world was vast, filled with mysteries, dangers, and challenges yet to be discovered. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing: whatever came next, he was ready. Because now, more than ever, he understood that true strength didn't come from the battles we won, but from the love, courage, and heart we carried with us through them. Leo closed his eyes, the softest of breaths escaping his chest. He was safe now. His sister was safe. And together, they would face whatever came next, knowing that the bonds they had forged in the fire of that battle were stronger than anything the world could throw their way. Tomorrow was another day, and who knew what adventures it would bring. But Leo was no longer afraid. He knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced everything before, with courage, love, and the unshakable will to protect each other. Because some things, like family, like heart, like love, were worth fighting for, no matter what. And that was the greatest adventure of all. Moral: courage isn't about not being scared, it's about facing your fears for the ones you love. It's not the absence of fear that makes a person brave, but rather the ability to stand tall in the face of that fear, to push forward when every instinct is telling you to turn back. It's the quiet moments, the ones when the storm has passed and all that remains is the silence, that reveal the true depth of strength inside us. In those moments, we realize that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the softest whisper, the steady heartbeat in the face of the unknown, the calmness in the chaos, the will to protect what matters most. For Leo, the true battle wasn't just against the Midnight Guardians or the terrifying forces of the Hollow Woods. It was the battle within himself, the battle to overcome the fear that gripped his heart when he saw his sister's life hanging in the balance. It was the internal struggle between running and fighting, between surrendering to the darkness or pushing forward into it. In the end, the most powerful weapon he wielded wasn't the branch in his hand or the power of the heartstone. It was his love for his sister, the unshakable bond that made him willing to face the unimaginable, to fight even when the odds seemed insurmountable. In life, we all face moments of fear, of uncertainty, of doubt. Whether it's a personal challenge, a decision that weighs heavy on our hearts, or the unexpected trials that life throws our way, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by what we can't control. But courage doesn't mean we're immune to fear. It means we choose to move forward anyway, even when the road ahead seems impossible. It's in those moments of fear that we discover the strength we didn't know we had, the resilience that lies hidden within us, waiting to be called upon. And then, when the battle is over and the dust settles, there's a quietness that fills the air. It's the space between breaths, the pause before the next chapter begins. In those silent moments, we often find ourselves reflecting on the journey, realizing that the strength we thought we lacked was there all along. It wasn't the clash of swords or the fight against monsters that defined us. It was the courage to keep going, to keep fighting for those we love, even when we didn't know how we would make it through. Sometimes, it's the smallest acts of bravery that have the greatest impact. The quiet decisions we make every day, the moments when we choose to speak up for someone, to stand by their side, to protect them no matter what. It's the courage to love even when it's hard, to care even when it hurts, to be there for someone when the world feels like it's falling apart. It's not the grand gestures, but the quiet, steadfast commitment to those we hold dear that truly defines courage. And just as Leo learned in the Hollow Woods, the most powerful force in the world isn't found in strength or power. It's found in love, in loyalty, and in the unwavering commitment to protect the ones who matter most. The strength we seek is not always something external. It's something that resides deep within us, waiting for the moment when we need it most. It's in the small, everyday acts of bravery that we build the foundation for something truly extraordinary. So, the next time you're faced with fear, remember that courage is not about being fearless. It's about standing strong in the face of it, moving forward despite the uncertainty, and finding strength in the quiet moments that follow the battle. Because in those moments, you'll see that the true measure of your courage is not how you face the storm, but how you rise after it, knowing that the strength to face anything was always within you, waiting to be unlocked. Courage is, at its core, the willingness to keep going. No matter what, for the ones you love, for the people who make the journey worthwhile, for the bonds that define us, and for the quiet power that resides in all of us.